3 years after my wife Lucille died, I finally hired a contractor to renovate her old home office. I was standing at her grave when my phone rang. It was the contractor, Mr. Russo, and his voice was shaking so hard I could barely understand him. "Pop," he said, "you need to come home, now, and bring your sons. Do not come alone. When we tore down the drywall, we found a safe. And on that safe is a note with your name on it. What we found inside that wall wasn't gold or cash. It was a judgment day that would tear my family apart forever. My name is Clarence Henderson, but everyone in this neighborhood calls me Pop. I am 68 years old, and I have spent 40 years scrubbing grease from my fingernails and building a legacy from scrap metal and sweat. I thought I had seen the worst of human nature working in an auto shop, but nothing prepared me for the sharks swimming in my own living room. Before I tell you what was in that safe, take a second to subscribe and tell me in the comments if you have ever been underestimated by your own children. It started on a Tuesday morning. The air in Atlanta was heavy with humidity, but inside my house the temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees the moment I walked through the door. I had just come back from the hardware store, and the first thing I heard was the aggressive sound of packing tape ripping against cardboard. It was a sound that made my teeth ache. I walked into the living room and froze. Victoria, my eldest son Terrence's wife, was standing there like a general on a battlefield. She was wearing a white pantsuit that cost more than my first car, and she was pointing a manicured finger at my late wife's baby grand piano. "Get this out of here," she snapped at a mover who looked terrified of her. "It takes up too much space, and the staging photos need to look modern. We need clean lines, not this sentimental clutter." I stood in the doorway gripping my cane, not because I needed it to walk, but because I needed to hold on to something to keep from exploding. That piano was not clutter. Lucille used to play gospel hymns on it every Sunday morning while the smell of bacon and biscuits drifted from the kitchen. It was the heart of this home. "Victoria," I said, my voice low and steady, "that piano is not going anywhere." She didn't even turn around. She just waved a hand at me like I was a fly buzzing around her expensive perfume. "Oh, Pop," she said with that fake sweetness that made my stomach turn. "Don't be difficult. We are doing you a favor. This house is a mausoleum. We need to liquidate these dusty assets so Terrence can manage your portfolio better." Liquidate. That was her favorite word. To her, my memories were just inventory waiting to be converted into cash for her next luxury vacation or some crypto scheme she had convinced my sons was the future. I watched as she walked over to my favorite armchair, the leather recliner where I had read bedtime stories to my boys, and slapped a bright yellow sticker on it. The sticker read, "To be discarded." I felt a tightening in my chest that had nothing to do with my heart condition and everything to do with heartbreak. My sons Terrence and Darnell were sitting at the dining room table staring at their phones, completely ignoring the fact that their wife and sister-in-law was dismantling their childhood home. They didn't look up when I entered. They didn't defend my things. They just let it happen. Then came the real insult. The doorbell didn't ring because the door was already open. A man in a shiny gray suit walked in. He looked like he had been manufactured in a factory that made sharks. "This is Brad," Victoria chirped, hooking her arm through his as if they were the couple that owned the place. "He is the top broker in Atlanta, and he is going to make us a fortune." Brad looked right through me. He looked at the crown molding. He looked at the hardwood floors. He looked at the view of the garden I had planted with my own hands. But he did not look at me. "Great bones," Brad said, tapping his tablet. "We will need to gut the kitchen, obviously, and knock down that wall to the office to create an open concept flow. Buyers these days want flow, not these dark little rooms. Once we stage it, we can list it for $1.5 million. The proceeds should be more than enough to get the old man a premium suite at Shady Pines." I cleared my throat loud enough to rattle the china in the cabinet. "I am not going to Shady Pines," I said, stepping into the center of the room. "And you are not knocking down my wife's office." Brad finally looked at me, but his eyes were empty. He looked at Victoria with a raised eyebrow as if asking why the furniture was talking. "Is he legally competent to sign the listing agreement?" he asked. Victoria laughed, a high-pitched sound that grated on my nerves. "We are working on that," she said, winking at him. "Don't worry about Pop. He forgets things. He gets confused. He doesn't even know how much this place is worth in the current market. We are just trying to protect him from himself." I looked at Terrence, my firstborn, the boy I had taught to throw a baseball. "The man I had bailed out of debt 3 times. Terrence," I said. "Are you going to let them talk about me like I am dead?" Terrence finally looked up from his phone. He looked tired and weak. "Pop, come on," he said, his voice whining. "Victoria knows real estate. Just let her handle it. You are stressed. Maybe you should go rest in your room while we finish the inventory. Rest in my room, in my own house." I realized then that to them I was already a ghost. They were just waiting for my body to catch up with their wishes. I didn't yell. I didn't throw them out. Not yet. I had learned a long time ago from working on engines that if you force a rusted bolt, it breaks. You have to apply pressure slowly. I just grabbed my keys and walked out. I needed to breathe. I needed to talk to the only person who ever truly understood me. I drove my old Ford truck to the St. Jude Cemetery on the edge of town. The silence there was better than the noise of betrayal at home. The grass was wet with morning dew as I knelt beside the granite headstone that read Lucille Henderson, beloved wife and mother. "Lucille," I whispered, touching the cold stone. "They are trying to sell the house. They are trying to erase you. They want to turn your office into an open concept flow, whatever the hell that means. I don't know how much longer I can play the fool. I don't know if I have the strength to fight them alone." That was when my phone buzzed in my pocket. I wiped my eyes and looked at the screen. It was Tony Russo. Tony was an old friend of ours, a contractor I had secretly hired 2 days ago. I had told him to start renovating Lucille's office, not to gut it, but to restore it. I wanted to surprise the family by turning it into a library. I thought he was calling to ask about paint colors or wood stain. I was wrong. "Hello, Tony," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. There was a long silence on the other end. All I could hear was the sound of heavy breathing and the background noise of a sledgehammer hitting concrete. "Pop," Tony said, and his voice was unrecognizable. It was tight and high, like a man who had just seen a ghost. "You need to come home, right now." "Tony, what is it? Did a pipe burst?" I asked, standing up. "No, Pop, listen to me," Tony hissed. "We took down the drywall behind the old bookshelf, the load-bearing one. It is hollow, Pop. There is a room back here, a room that is not on the blueprints, a hidden room." My hand tightened around the phone. Lucille had designed that office herself. She never let anyone in there when she was working on her tax files. "And Pop, you need to bring your sons." Tony continued, his voice trembling. "Bring Terrence and Darnell." "Why?" I asked, my heart starting to hammer against my ribs. "Because there is a safe," Tony said. "And there is a note taped to it in Lucille's handwriting. It says, 'Do not open unless Clarence is here with the boys.'" "Pop, I have been in construction for 30 years and I have never felt a chill like this. You need to get here before anyone else sees this. But whatever you do, don't tell Victoria. Just get the boys." I hung up the phone. The cemetery was quiet, but inside my head a storm was brewing. A hidden room, a safe, a note from the grave. Lucille had been gone for 3 years, but it seemed she had one last move to make. I got back in my truck and turned the ignition. I didn't know what was in that wall, but I knew one thing. The open concept flow was about to get a lot more complicated. It took 45 minutes for my sons to arrive. 45 minutes of me sitting on a bucket of joint compound while Mr. Russo paced back and forth in the hallway, wiping sweat from his forehead with a dirty rag. The air in the house was thick with the dust of demolition, but heavier still with the weight of waiting. When I finally heard the sound of a car engine in the driveway. It wasn't the humble hum of a family sedan. It was the aggressive roar of Terrence's leased sports car, followed by the squeal of brakes that cost more than my first house. The front door swung open and the noise of the outside world rushed in. Terrence walked in first, wearing his pastel golf shirt and white pants that looked ridiculous in a construction zone. He was checking his watch as if he had a board meeting to attend instead of a father to visit. Darnell followed close behind, looking like a shadow of his older brother, his eyes darting around the room nervously. And then there was Victoria. She stepped into the foyer and immediately wrinkled her nose, covering her mouth with a silk scarf as if the very air of my home was poisonous. "So what is the emergency?" Pop, Terrence asked without even saying hello. He looked at the plastic sheeting hanging from the ceiling and grimaced. "Victoria has a showing in Buckhead in an hour. We do not have time for games." I stood up slowly, my knees popping in the silence. "This isn't a game," I said. Victoria stepped forward, her heels clicking sharply on the hardwood. "Well, it better be good," she said, her voice muffled by the scarf. "Did you find asbestos? Because if you did, we need to disclose that to the buyers immediately, and that is going to kill the listing price." She didn't ask if I was okay. She didn't ask why the contractor looked like he had seen a ghost. She only worried about the listing price. Money was the only language she spoke fluently. Mr. Russo stepped out from the shadows of the hallway. His face was pale under the layer of white dust. "Mr. Henderson didn't call you here for asbestos," he said, his voice gruff and serious. "Come with me, and watch your step." We walked single file down the hallway toward the back of the house, toward the room that had been Lucille's sanctuary for 30 years. As we approached the office, the smell changed. It wasn't just dry lumber and plaster anymore. There was a smell of old paper and stale air, a scent that had been trapped in darkness for a long time. The drywall had been cut away, revealing a dark gap between the studs. It wasn't just a hollow space. It was a doorway. "What is this?" Terrence asked, stepping closer, his greed suddenly piquing his interest. "A wine cellar. Did Mom hide a wine cellar back here?" I watched his face. I saw the calculation happening behind his eyes. He wasn't thinking about his mother. He was thinking about vintage bottles he could auction off. "It is a panic room," Mr. Russo said quietly. "Or a vault. We found the ventilation shaft hidden in the attic line. It was built into the foundation when the house was remodeled 15 years ago." Victoria pushed past Darnell, ignoring the dust that settled on her pristine blazer. "A vault," she repeated, and for the first time since she arrived, her eyes were wide, not with annoyance, but with hunger. Why would Lucille need a vault? What did she have to hide? I didn't answer. I just gestured for Russo to finish the job. He picked up his sledgehammer. The sound of metal hitting stone echoed through the house like a gunshot, making Darnell jump. Swing after swing, the opening grew wider. Dust billowed out in thick white clouds, coating us all. Victoria coughed and waved her hands frantically, but she didn't leave. She stood rooted to the spot, mesmerized by the possibility of treasure. When the hole was finally big enough for a man to walk through, Mr. Russo stepped back and shined his heavy-duty flashlight into the darkness. "Go ahead, Pop," he said softly. "It is your house." I took the flashlight. My hand was trembling. I stepped over the debris and squeezed into the narrow space. The beam of light cut through the gloom. It was a tiny room, barely 6 feet wide. The walls were lined with metal shelves, stacked high with banker's boxes. But my eyes were drawn instantly to the object sitting on the concrete floor at the far end. It was a safe. An old iron beast of a safe, black and heavy-looking like something that belonged in a bank from the 1920s. It sat there silent and imposing, a monolith of secrets. Terrence squeezed in behind me, pushing me slightly. "Move over, Pop. Let me see," he said. When the light hit the safe, he let out a low whistle. "Look at that. That is serious hardware." Mom must have been stashing cash from the business for decades. Victoria didn't wait for an invitation. She shoved past Darnell, who was lingering at the entrance, and forced her way into the cramped space. The air in there was instantly suffocating. It smelled of metal and greed. "Open it," Victoria commanded, her voice echoing off the concrete walls. "I don't know the combination," I said quietly, staring at the dial. "Don't give me that." Terrence snapped, his patience evaporating. "You are her husband. Of course you know it. What is inside, Pop? Gold bars, bearer bonds, cash. Stop holding out on us." I looked at my son, really looked at him. In the harsh light of the flashlight, his face looked distorted by avarice. He didn't look like the boy I raised. He looked like a stranger who smelled a payday. "I am telling you I don't know," I said. "Lucille handled the finances. You know that." Victoria turned to Mr. Russo, who was standing outside the hole, watching us with a look of deep discomfort. "You," she barked, pointing a finger at him through the dust. "Go get your tools. Get a drill, a saw, whatever you need. Crack this thing open." Mr. Russo crossed his arms over his chest. "Lady, I am a contractor, not a safe cracker. And I take my orders from Mr. Henderson, not you." Victoria's face turned a blotchy red. "I am the power of attorney for this estate," she lied blatantly. "Open it or I will sue you for everything you own." Terrence didn't wait for the contractor. He looked around the small room and grabbed a crowbar that Russo had left leaning against the wall. "Fine," he grunted. "If you won't do it, I will. It is just old metal. I can pop the hinges." He raised the crowbar high over his head, ready to bring it down on the dial of the safe. The violence in his motion was shocking. He was ready to destroy his mother's legacy for a chance at quick cash. "Stop," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it was hard. Terrence ignored me. He gritted his teeth, preparing to strike. "We need to see what is in there. Pop, move aside." I didn't move aside. Instead, I reached behind the door frame of the hidden room where I knew Lucille used to keep an emergency kit. My hand closed around the cold wooden stock of my old Remington shotgun. It wasn't loaded, I knew that, but they didn't. I racked the slide. The sound was unmistakable. Cha-chick. It was a sound that commanded instant, absolute silence. Terrence froze the crowbar, hovering in midair. He turned slowly, his eyes bulging when he saw the barrel pointed at the floor between us. "Pop, are you crazy?" he stammered, lowering the crowbar slowly. "Put that down." "Get out of the vault," I said, my voice steady and cold. "Everyone out. Now." Victoria looked like she was about to scream, but seeing the gun in the hands of a man she had spent all morning calling senile made her rethink her strategy. She backed out of the hole, her heels scraping awkwardly on the debris. Terrence followed, dropping the crowbar with a loud clang. Darnell was already halfway down the hall, shaking like a leaf. I followed them out, stepping back into the office. I leaned the shotgun against the desk, keeping it within reach. The atmosphere in this room had shifted from greedy excitement to terrified tension. "You threatened us," Victoria hissed, her face pale. "You threatened your own children with a gun." "I am calling the police. This proves you are unstable." "Call them," I challenged. "Tell them you were breaking and entering into a secured room in my house and attempting to destroy my property. See who they arrest." Mr. Russo stepped forward, acting as a human shield between me and them. "Folks, calm down," he said, his voice firm. "Nobody is calling anyone. Look at the safe. Really look at it." He pointed his flashlight back into the hole. On the front of the safe, taped just above the dial, was a white envelope. In the chaos of the discovery, no one had noticed it. I walked over and carefully peeled the tape back. The envelope was yellowed with age, but the handwriting on it was sharp and clear. It was Lucille's handwriting. Just seeing those loops and curves made a lump form in my throat. "Read it," Victoria demanded, though her voice was less imperious now. I put on my reading glasses, my hands shaking slightly. I took a deep breath and read the words aloud. "To my husband Clarence, do not open this safe until you are ready to admit the truth about our children. Do not open this safe until you realize that they are beyond saving. If you are reading this, it means they have finally broken your heart completely. Bring them here. Let them watch. And then let justice be done." The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush a man. Darnell slumped against the wall, sliding down until he was sitting on the floor, his head in his hands. "Oh God," he whispered. "Mom knew. She knew everything." Terrence looked at the note and then at me. He tried to laugh, but it came out as a dry, choking sound. "This is ridiculous. It is just another one of her dramatic games. She was always controlling Pop, you know that. She just wants to control us from the grave." "Shut up," Darnell said, suddenly looking up. His eyes were red. "Just shut up, Terrence." Victoria wasn't listening to the emotional turmoil. Her eyes were still fixed on the safe. "Justice," she muttered. "Justice usually means money in a will. She thinks she is punishing us, but she probably left a fortune to some charity and we need to stop it. Clarence, you have to open it. We have to know what she did." I looked at the note again. The truth about our children. Beyond saving. Lucille had seen this day coming years ago. While I was making excuses for them, while I was covering their debts, she was preparing for the end. She saw the rot in them that I refused to acknowledge. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my wallet. Tucked inside behind a photo of Lucille and me on our wedding day was a small, folded piece of paper. It was a sequence of numbers she had given me on her deathbed. She had said it was for a rainy day. I never knew what it was for until this exact moment. I walked back into the vault. The air felt colder now. "Pop, don't," Terrence said, his voice trembling. "Maybe we should just leave it. Maybe we don't want to know." "It is too late for that, son," I said. I knelt before the iron beast. I turned the dial. Right to 18, left to 04, right to 19, left to 82, the date our daughter was born and the date she died. The tumblers clicked into place with a sound of finality. It was a heavy mechanical thud that echoed in the silence of the room. I grabbed the cold iron handle and pulled. The hinges groaned, protesting against the years of rust and neglect. The door swung open. Victoria pushed forward again, unable to help herself, breathless with anticipation. But as the light from the flashlight flooded the interior of the safe, her face fell. There were no stacks of cash. There were no gold bars shimmering in the dark. There was no jewelry. The safe was almost empty. Inside, there were only 3 thick, leather-bound ledgers and a small black USB drive sitting on top of them. "That is it!" Victoria shrieked, her voice cracking with hysteria. "That is it! Books! She left us books!" I reached in and pulled out the first ledger. It was heavy. I opened it to the first page. The smell of old ink drifted up. At the top of the page, written in red ink, was a name. Terrence. And underneath his name was a column titled Blood Debts. I looked up at my son. His face had gone completely white. He knew what was in that book. He recognized the accounting of his sins. "What is on the drive?" Darnell asked, his voice barely a whisper. I picked up the USB drive. It was small and unassuming, but it felt heavy in my hand like a grenade with the pin pulled out. "I don't know," I said, standing up and facing them. "But we are going to find out, right now." I walked past them out of the dusty office and toward the living room where my laptop sat on the coffee table. They followed me not because they wanted to, but because they were trapped by the gravity of what Lucille had left behind. The house was silent, but the storm had officially broken. The walls were down, and the truth was about to come out. I placed the small black USB drive in my pocket. That digital bomb would have to wait. My attention was entirely focused on the leather-bound book in my hands. It was heavy, much heavier than a notebook should be. The cover was worn at the corners where Lucille's hands had touched it thousands of times. I ran my thumb over the surface, and for a fleeting second I could almost smell her lavender hand cream rising from the paper. The room was so quiet I could hear the hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen down the hall. In the small, dusty office, the air felt thick enough to choke on. Mr. Russo stood by the door, his arms crossed, acting as a silent sentinel. Darnell was huddled in the corner, chewing on his thumbnail, a habit he had never outgrown since childhood. Victoria was tapping her foot impatiently, but her eyes were locked on the ledger with a mixture of fear and calculation. And Terrence, my firstborn, stood rigid, his face slick with a sheen of sweat that had nothing to do with the Georgia heat. I opened the book. The spine cracked loud in the silence. The first page was not a list of numbers. It was a table of contents written in Lucille's impeccable cursive script. There were colored tabs separating sections. The first tab was red. It simply said Terrence. I looked up at him. He tried to meet my gaze but failed, shifting his eyes to the window instead. "What is it, Pop?" he asked, his voice tight and higher than usual. "Just numbers, right? Mom was obsessed with tracking expenses. She probably wrote down every time I borrowed $20 for gas in high school." I didn't answer him. I turned to the section marked with the red tab. The pages were filled, rows and rows of entries dating back 10 years. This wasn't petty cash. This was a systematic draining of our life's blood. I cleared my throat and began to read aloud. My voice was calm, but inside I felt like I was swallowing broken glass. Entry 1. August 12, 2014. Terrence requested $4,500 for emergency transmission repair on the delivery truck. Reason given was catastrophic gear failure. I paused and looked at him. "I remember that day. You came to the house crying, saying the business would stall if we didn't fix the truck immediately. You said the mechanic needed cash up front." Terrence laughed nervously, wiping his forehead. "Yeah, I remember. That old truck was a piece of junk. We were lucky to keep it running." I looked back down at the book. Underneath the entry, Lucille had written a note in blue ink. "Verification with mechanic shows no transmission work was done. Oil change only. Cost $80. Remaining $4,420 unaccounted for. Coincides with Terrence's trip to Las Vegas with Victoria." The silence that followed was absolute. Victoria stiffened beside him. Her face, which had been full of arrogance a moment ago, suddenly went blank. I turned the page. The sound of the paper turning was like a whip crack. Entry 2, March 3, 2016. Invoice number 709 submitted by Terrence for inventory purchase. 50 alternators from Apex Auto Parts. Total cost $12,000. I looked up again. $12,000, Terrence. "I remember asking you why the shelves looked empty that month. You told me there was a supply chain issue." Terrence took a step back, his hands raising defensively. "There was a supply chain issue, Pop. Apex was a new vendor. They stiffed us. I told Mom that. We lost the money. Issue. It happens in business." I read Lucille's note underneath. Checked state business registry. Apex Auto Parts does not exist. Bank records show check was deposited into a shell account under the name T&V Holdings. T&V, Terrence and Victoria. I stared at my son. You didn't get stiffed by a vendor. You were the vendor. You stole $12,000 from your mother and father and put it into your own pocket. That is a lie, Terrence shouted suddenly, his face turning red. Mom got it confused. She was already getting sick back then. She mixed up the accounts. You can't trust the scribbles of a dying woman over your own son. I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. I had to drain the wound completely. Entry 3. October 21st, 2018. This was right after your mother's first heart attack. Withdrawal of $25,000 for emergency tax settlement. Terrence claimed the IRS was threatening to seize the shop. I looked at Victoria. You were there that day. You sat at our kitchen table holding Lucille's hand while she was weak from surgery. You told her the stress of an audit would kill her. You told her to just pay it so she could rest. Victoria crossed her arms, looking away. We were trying to help. The tax code is complicated. We thought there was a liability. I read the final note on the page. Called IRS agent directly. No audit on file. No outstanding debt. Money was traced to a down payment on a luxury condo in Buckhead. The same condo Victoria is currently renting out as an Airbnb. The total at the bottom of the page was circled 3 times in red ink, $450,000. I closed the book halfway, keeping my finger on the page. Nearly $500,000. That is not borrowing gas money, Terrence. That is grand larceny. That is stealing the retirement your mother and I worked 40 years for. While I was under the hood of cars busting my knuckles and inhaling exhaust, you were siphoning us dry. Terrence exploded. He threw his hands up, pacing the small room like a trapped animal. This is insane. You are reading a diary, Pop, not a ledger. Mom was paranoid. She hated Victoria. She always did. She made this up to poison you against us. Where is the proof? Anyone can write numbers in a book. Where are the receipts? You have nothing but ink on paper. He pointed a shaking finger at me. You are going to ruin this family over a fantasy. I ran that shop. I managed the accounts. I know where every dime went. If money was missing, it was probably that cashier Brenda. She was always shady. Or maybe Mom forgot she spent it, blaming the employees, blaming his mother. He had no bottom. I watched him lie. I watched the way his eyes wouldn't settle. I watched the way he tried to bully the truth into submission. It broke my heart, but it also hardened my resolve. Lucille knew you would say that, I said softly. I opened the book again. This time I didn't read. I reached into the back of the ledger where a thick manila envelope was glued to the binding. I unclasped it and pulled out a stack of papers. They were clipped together chronologically. I pulled out a yellow carbon copy paper crinkled with age. Here is the receipt from the mechanic in 2014, Terrence, signed by the owner stating oil change only. And here right next to it is the cashed check for $4,500. And look at the back. It wasn't endorsed by a mechanic. It was endorsed by the Golden Nugget Casino in Las Vegas. I held the paper up. My hand wasn't shaking anymore. And here I continued pulling out another document. The bank transfer record for the $12,000 to Apex Auto Parts. Look at the routing number. I went to the bank yesterday, Terrence. I had them pull the ownership of this account. It lists 2 beneficiaries, Terrence Henderson and Victoria Henderson. I tossed the papers onto the desk. They slid across the polished wood, stopping right in front of Victoria. And the $25,000 for the tax audit, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Here is the letter from the IRS confirming no activity on our account for that year. And here is the closing statement for your condo dated 3 days after the withdrawal. The down payment matches exactly to the penny. Terrence looked at the papers. He looked like he had been punched in the gut. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. The wall of lies he had built for a decade had just collapsed under the weight of paper and ink. He slumped against the doorframe, the fight draining out of him. Pop, you have to understand, he stammered. We were drowning. We had debts. We just needed a leg up. I was going to pay it back. I swear I was going to pay every cent back once the crypto investments took off. Investments, I repeated bitterly. You gambled with our sweat. You bet our legacy on digital coins and luxury condos. Victoria stepped in then. She placed a hand on Terrence's shoulder, not to comfort him, but to steady herself. She looked at me with cold, hard eyes. So what she said. Her voice was sharp, devoid of shame. So he took some money from the family business. He is the heir, Clarence. It is his money anyway. He just took an advance. He worked at that shop for 10 years. He was underpaid. You paid him peanuts while you sat on a pile of cash. He deserved a living wage. A living wage, I asked, incredulous. $450,000 is not a living wage, Victoria. It is a fortune. It is family money, she snapped. It all goes into the same pot eventually. Why does it matter if he spent it then or if he spends it when you die? You are being petty. You are putting money over your own son. Look at him, he is a wreck. Are you happy now? You proved your point. You proved you are a miser who tracks every penny while his children struggle. She was twisting the knife, trying to turn the victim into the villain. It was a masterclass in manipulation. I am not a miser, I said, standing up. I stepped closer to them, towering over them in the small room. I am a father who thought he was raising a man, not a parasite. And this isn't about money, Victoria. If he had asked, I would have given him the shirt off my back. I did give him everything. I pointed at the book. This is about betrayal. This is about looking me in the eye for 10 years, smiling at Sunday dinner, hugging your mother on her birthday, all while you were stealing the safety net she built for her old age. You didn't just steal money, I said, my voice trembling with rage. You stole her peace of mind. You stole the vacations she never took because she thought we were broke. You stole the better doctors we didn't hire because the accounts were low. Terrence looked up, tears streaming down his face. Pop, don't say that. We didn't hurt Mom. I slammed the ledger shut. The sound echoed like a gavel in a courtroom. You killed her spirit long before her heart gave out, I said. And now you want to sell her office. You want to erase the scene of the crime. I picked up the USB drive again. This book is the theft, I said, holding the drive up to the light. But this drive, this is the cover-up. And if the book made you look like a thief, Terrence, I wonder what this video will make you look like. Victoria lunged forward, her hand reaching for the drive. Give me that, she shrieked. Mr. Russo moved faster than I thought a man of his size could. He blocked her path, his broad chest acting as a wall. Back off, lady, he growled. I looked at my son and his wife. The room felt smaller than ever. Sit down, I commanded, pointing to the 2 wooden chairs opposite the desk. Sit down and watch, because we are not done. We are just getting started. The room was silent except for the whirring of my old laptop fan as it struggled to boot up. That mechanical hum sounded like a chainsaw in the quiet office. I plugged the small black USB drive into the side port. My hands were trembling, not from age, but from a cold dread that was spreading through my veins. I looked at my sons. Terrence was wiping sweat from his upper lip, his eyes darting between the screen and the door as if looking for an escape route. Darnell was chewing his fingernails down to the quick, his leg bouncing nervously. Victoria sat frozen, her face a mask of porcelain indifference, but I could see the pulse jumping in her neck. I clicked the file named Evidence. The media player opened. A black screen flickered, and then suddenly there she was, Lucille. A collective gasp went through the room. It wasn't the Lucille we remembered from the old photo albums, the strong woman with the bright smile who ran the church choir. This was Lucille from the last month of her life. She was sitting in this very chair wearing her favorite blue robe, but she looked small. Her skin was gray and papery. Her breathing was labored, a wet, rasping sound that filled the speakers and seemed to suck the oxygen out of the room we were sitting in. I felt tears prick my eyes. Seeing her like that brought all the pain of those final weeks rushing back. The late nights holding her hand while she gasped for air. The confusion of the doctors who couldn't understand why her heart medication wasn't working. On the screen, Lucille adjusted the camera with a shaking hand. She looked directly into the lens, and it felt like she was looking right into my soul. "Clarence," she whispered, and her voice was so weak it broke my heart all over again. "If you are watching this, it means I am gone, and it means you finally opened the safe. I am sorry I couldn't tell you this while I was alive. I didn't want to break your heart. I didn't want you to know what I suspect, but I need to protect you." She paused, coughing into a handkerchief. When she pulled it away, I saw her glance nervously at the door of the office in the video. "They are changing my medicine, Clarence," she said. In the room, Terrence stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Turn it off!" he shouted, his voice cracking. "This is morbid. She was delirious, Pop. She was on heavy painkillers. You can't listen to this." "Sit down," Mr. Russo growled, stepping forward from the wall. His arms were crossed over his chest like tree trunks. The boss said, "Watch." So we watch. Terrence sank back into his chair, defeated. On the screen, Lucille reached into the pocket of her robe and pulled out a small orange prescription bottle. It wasn't one of her regular pharmacy bottles. It was a generic bottle with no label, just a handwritten sticker that said vitamins. Victoria brought these to me yesterday, Lucille told the camera. She told me they were herbal supplements. She said they would help with my energy levels. She said Dr. Sterling approved them. But Clarence, I called Dr. Sterling this morning while you were at the shop. He never spoke to Victoria. He never approved anything. I froze. I remembered that bottle. I remembered seeing it on her nightstand. I remembered asking Victoria about it, and she told me it was an expensive holistic blend she had ordered from a specialist in California. She said she just wanted Mom to feel better. Lucille opened the bottle on the video and poured a few pills into her palm. They were green capsules. I looked them up, Lucille continued. I used the internet. These aren't just vitamins, Clarence. This is St. John's wort, concentrated high-dose St. John's wort. On screen, she looked terrified. The website says you cannot mix this with digoxin or warfarin. It cancels out the heart medication. It causes dangerous drops in blood pressure and irregular heartbeats. I have been taking them for 3 days because I trusted her. And for 3 days, I have felt like I am dying. The video, Lucille leaned forward, her eyes wet. I stopped taking them this morning, but I am afraid the damage is done. My chest feels so heavy. I am recording this because if my heart stops tonight, it wasn't nature. It was help. It was help from family. The video ended abruptly with the sound of a door opening in the background and Lucille quickly hiding the camera. The screen went black. For 10 seconds, nobody breathed. The silence was absolute. It was the silence of a tomb. I slowly turned my head to look at Victoria. The air in the room felt electric, charged with a violence that was about to explode. St. John's wort. I said, my voice sounding distant and hollow to my own ears. You gave a woman with congestive heart failure a supplement known to neutralize her medication. Victoria let out a sharp laugh. It sounded like glass breaking. Oh, please, she scoffed, waving her hand dismissively. She was paranoid. I was trying to help her. It was a natural supplement. How was I supposed to know it interacted with her meds? I am a real estate agent, not a doctor. You lied, I said, standing up. My hands were balled into fists at my sides. You told her Dr. Sterling approved it. You told me it was from a specialist. You lied to get her to swallow poison. I didn't know, Victoria shouted, standing up to match me. Her mask was slipping. Her face was twisted into a sneer of defensive, ugly rage. She was old, Clarence. She was sick. Her heart was a ticking time bomb anyway. I just gave her some herbs to boost her mood. If she died, it is because she was weak, not because of some vitamins. Liar. The word didn't come from me. It came from the corner of the room. We all turned. Darnell was standing up. He was shaking so hard his teeth were chattering. He looked at Victoria with a horror that was pure and raw. You knew, he whispered. Shut up, Darnell, Victoria hissed, her eyes narrowing into slits. No. Darnell said, his voice rising, getting stronger. I was there. I was in the kitchen when you ordered them online. I asked you what they were. I remember, Victoria. I asked if they were safe for Mom, and you laughed. Darnell looked at me, tears streaming down his face. Pop, she laughed. She looked at me and said, if we are lucky, they will speed things up. This waiting game is costing us money. I felt the blood drain from my face. My knees felt weak. I grabbed the edge of the desk to steady myself. You heard her say that I asked, my voice barely a whisper. You heard her say she wanted your mother to die faster, and you did nothing. Darnell sobbed, burying his face in his hands. I thought she was joking, Pop. I swear I thought it was just her dark humor. I didn't think she would actually do it. I was scared of her. I'm sorry. Oh God, I am so sorry. Terrence looked at his wife as if he was seeing a monster for the first time. You did what, he stammered. Victoria, tell me you didn't do that. Stealing money is one thing, but this is... Victoria spun on him, her eyes blazing with a fire that consumed everything. Don't you look at me like that, Terrence Henderson, she screamed. I did it for us. We were drowning in debt because of your incompetence. We needed the inheritance. We needed this house. Your mother was clutching onto life and dragging us down with her. Someone had to make the hard choice. Someone had to be the adult. She admitted it. She stood there in my wife's office, surrounded by the dust of the walls she wanted to tear down, and she admitted that she had accelerated Lucille's death for a payout. Murder, I said. The word hung in the air, heavy and cold. It is not murder. Victoria screeched. It was negligence at best. You can't prove intent. It was just an herbal supplement. No jury will convict a grieving daughter-in-law for trying to help with holistic medicine. She was confident. She was arrogant. She thought she could talk her way out of anything. But then she looked at the laptop. She looked at the USB drive still glowing with a blue light. That video, she muttered. That video is the only proof. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Without that video, it was just hearsay. It was just Darnell's word against hers, and she knew she could bully Darnell into silence. But the video was objective. The video was Lucille testifying from the grave. Victoria moved. She didn't move like a human. She moved like a cornered animal. She lunged across the desk, her manicured claws reaching for the laptop. "No, you don't!" she screamed. I tried to grab it, but I was too slow. She knocked the laptop off the desk. It hit the floor with a sickening crunch. But she wasn't done. She grabbed a heavy brass paperweight from the desk, a gift I had given Lucille for our 30th anniversary, and raised it high above her head, ready to smash the computer into oblivion. "Hey," Mr. Russo shouted. The contractor moved with the speed of a linebacker. He leaped over the pile of drywall debris and tackled Victoria just as her arm came down. They crashed into the bookshelf. Books and papers flew everywhere. Victoria was screaming a high-pitched sound of pure fury, kicking and scratching at Mr. Russo's face. "Let go of me, you dirty laborer," she shrieked. "Let go of me." "Get the drive, Pop." Mr. Russo grunted, holding her wrist down. "Get the drive." I scrambled to the floor. The laptop was cracked, the screen shattered, but the USB drive was still plugged into the side, blinking its steady blue light. I pulled it out, clutching it in my hand like it was the most precious diamond in the world. I stood up, breathing hard, my heart hammering against my ribs. "I have it," I said, holding it up. "It is safe." Mr. Russo hauled Victoria to her feet. She was panting, her hair wild, her expensive suit covered in white dust. She looked deranged. Terrence was cowering in the corner. Darnell was still crying on the floor. I looked at this woman, this person I had welcomed into my home, this person who had eaten at my table, and I felt nothing but a cold, steely resolve. "Get out of my house," I said quietly. Victoria straightened her jacket, trying to regain some shred of dignity. "You can't kick us out," she spat. "We have rights. Terrence has rights." I walked over to her until I was inches from her face. I gripped the USB drive so tight it cut into my palm. "You are not leaving because I am kicking you out, Victoria," I said. "You are leaving because if you don't, I will use this shotgun to defend my life against an intruder who just tried to destroy evidence of a homicide." I looked at Mr. Russo. "Tony, did you see her attack me?" Mr. Russo wiped a scratch on his cheek where she had clawed him. "I saw everything, Mr. Henderson. She went for a weapon. You were in imminent danger." I looked back at her. "You have 1 hour," I said. "Take your husband. Take your brother-in-law. Get out of my sight. But don't think for a second that this is over. You can run, but you can't run from this." I held up the drive. "Lucille just gave me the map to your destruction," I whispered, "and I am going to follow it to the end." Victoria glared at me one last time before turning on her heel and storming out. Terrence scrambled after her like a beaten dog. Darnell lingered for a moment, looking at me with pleading eyes, but I turned my back on him. When the front door slammed shut, the silence returned, but it wasn't peaceful. It was the heavy silence of a battlefield after the first shot has been fired. Mr. Russo picked up the broken laptop. "I can fix the screen, Pop," he said gently, "but the drive is what matters." I looked at the small black device in my hand. "This isn't just a drive, Tony," I said. "This is a death sentence, and I am going to be the executioner." But I knew it wouldn't be that easy. Victoria was cornered, but she wasn't finished. She would come back. She would come back with lawyers, with lies, with everything she had. I needed to be ready. I walked over to the phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in years. "Hello," I said when the voice answered. "Is this Althea Gibson?" "This is Clarence Henderson. Lucille told me if I ever opened the safe, I should call you immediately." "Well, Althea, I opened it. And we have a war to fight." The storm didn't just arrive. It crashed into us like a physical blow from the heavens. By 6 in the evening, the sky over Atlanta had turned a bruised purple color that I had only seen before tornadoes. The wind began to howl around the eaves of the house, stripping the leaves from the magnolia trees and slamming them against the siding. Inside the house, the air grew heavy and wet. It was the kind of pressure that makes your joints ache and your head throb. We were trapped. Victoria had tried to leave after the confrontation in the office, but her luxury car wouldn't start. Maybe it was the battery, or maybe it was divine intervention keeping them here for the reckoning. When the power went out, it happened all at once. There was no flicker, no warning. 1 second the lamps were casting a warm yellow glow on the tension in the living room, and the next, we were plunged into absolute suffocating darkness. The hum of the refrigerator died. The air conditioner sputtered and stopped, leaving us in a sudden silence that was instantly filled by the roar of the rain on the roof. I sat in my armchair in the corner of the living room, the only place I felt I could watch all the exits. The darkness changed the house. This place where I had raised my children, where Lucille and I had danced in the kitchen to old records, suddenly felt like a stranger. The shadows stretched out like long fingers reaching for me. Every creak of the floorboard sounded like a footstep. Every rattle of the window pane sounded like a threat. I could hear them moving in the kitchen. Victoria and Terrence. They were whispering. Darnell had retreated to the guest bedroom hours ago claiming a migraine, but I knew he was just hiding from his own conscience. But my eldest son and his wife were awake. They were huddled together in the dark, and the sound of their hushed voices drifted down the hallway, carried by the draft. I stood up slowly. My knees protested, but I ignored the pain. I needed to know what they were planning. I knew the layout of this house better than I knew the lines on my own hand. I moved through the living room, navigating by touch, my fingers trailing along the wall. I stepped carefully, avoiding the loose floorboard near the entrance to the dining room. I moved like a ghost in my own home. I stopped just outside the kitchen door. The storm outside provided flashes of lightning that illuminated the room in brief strobe like bursts. In those flashes I saw them. Victoria was leaning against the counter holding a lit candle. The flame cast long dancing shadows on her face, making her look demonic. Terrence was pacing back and forth, wringing his hands. "We can't just wait," Victoria hissed. Her voice was low, but it carried a sharp edge of desperation. "He has the drive, Terrence. He has the evidence. If he gives that to the lawyers tomorrow morning, we are finished. Do you understand? Prison. We will go to federal prison." I held my breath, pressing my back against the cold plaster of the wall. "I know," Terrence whispered back, his voice trembling. "But what can we do? He is crazy. He pulled a gun on us. He is watching us like a hawk." "He is an old man," Victoria snapped. She moved closer to him, the candlelight flickering in her eyes. "He is confused. He is stressed. And now it is dark. The stairs to the basement are steep, Terrence. The fuse box is down there." My heart stopped. The blood froze in my veins. I knew exactly where this was going. "He needs to check the fuses." Victoria continued, her voice dropping to a seductive whisper. "It would be so easy. A slip, a fall in the dark. At his age, a fall down those concrete stairs is fatal. Or at least it causes a brain injury severe enough to make him incompetent. If he is incapacitated, I become his legal guardian again. I get control of the estate. I get control of the evidence. I listened to my daughter-in-law plan my murder. She spoke about it with the same casual tone she used to discuss closing a real estate deal. It was a problem to be solved, a transaction to be completed. Terrence stopped pacing. I couldn't see his face in the dark, but I could hear the hesitation in his breathing. "You want to kill him?" he asked. "Vic, that is my dad." "We can't kill him." "We aren't killing him," Victoria insisted, gripping his arms. "It is an accident. Accidents happen all the time to seniors, especially during storms. Who is going to question it? The police already think he is senile thanks to that report I filed. If he falls, it is a tragedy. But it is a tragedy that saves our lives." She paused, letting the words sink in. "Think about the baby Terrence. Think about our future. Do you want your child to be born while you are in a jail cell? Do you want to lose everything because of a vindictive old man and a dead woman's diary?" I waited for Terrence to scream. I waited for him to push her away, to tell her she was insane, to defend the man who had carried him on his shoulders. I waited for the son I raised to show up, but all I heard was silence. And then a soft, defeated whisper. "How do we get him to the stairs?" That question broke something inside me that I didn't know was still whole. It wasn't just a crack, it was a shattering. My son wasn't just a thief, he wasn't just a liar. He was a coward who would trade his father's life for his own comfort. I backed away slowly. I didn't stay to hear the rest of the plan. I knew enough. They would come for me soon. They would say the power needed to be fixed. They would try to lure me into the dark. I retreated to the den, the small room off the main hallway. I closed the door and locked it. It was a flimsy lock, one that could be kicked open easily, but it would give me a warning. I sat in the heavy oak chair facing the door. I placed the Remington shotgun across my lap. It wasn't loaded with buckshot, only birdshot meant for scaring off crows, but at close range it would stop a man. Or a monster. I sat there in the dark, listening to the wind batter the house. Lightning flashed, illuminating the room for a split second before plunging me back into blackness. I looked down at my hands. These hands had changed Terrence's diapers. These hands had taught him to hold a baseball bat. These hands had signed the checks for his college tuition. These hands had held him when he cried after his first heartbreak. And now these hands were holding a weapon to protect me from him. A tear rolled down my cheek, hot and salty. I didn't wipe it away. I let it fall. It was the last tear I would shed for Terrence Henderson. Lucille, I whispered into the darkness. You were right. You were right about everything. I see them now. I see them clearly. The pain was a physical weight in my chest, heavier than the shotgun. It is a specific kind of hell to realize that the people you would die for are the ones holding the knife. I thought about the note on the safe. Beyond saving. I had refused to believe it. I had thought love was enough to fix anything. I thought if I just loved them harder, if I just gave them more, if I just forgave them one more time, they would change. But you cannot love a snake into becoming a dove. You can only get bitten. I heard a floorboard creak outside the door, then another. They were coming. They were moving slowly, trying to be quiet. Pop, a voice called out from the darkness. It was Terrence. His voice was shaking, feigning concern. Pop, are you in there? The fuses blew. I think I know how to fix them, but I need you to hold the flashlight for me. It is down in the basement. I didn't answer. I just thumbed back the hammer of the shotgun. The click was loud in the silence. Pop Victoria's voice joined in, sweeter now, dripping with fake worry. Clarence, please open the door. We are worried about you. It is dangerous to be alone in the dark. I sat like a statue. I wasn't afraid anymore. The fear had burned away, leaving only a cold gray ash of resolve. I wasn't just Clarence Henderson the mechanic anymore. I wasn't just Pop. I was the judgment that Lucille had left in the safe. Come in, I said, my voice steady and strong, cutting through the noise of the storm. I raised the barrel of the gun, leveling it at the doorknob. Come in and let's go to the basement, I said. But nobody is falling down those stairs by accident tonight. If we go down, we go down together. The handle jiggled, then stopped. They heard the tone in my voice. They knew. The prey had become the predator. I sat there in the dark, waiting for the lightning to strike again. I was ready. The storm outside was raging, but the storm inside this house had finally found its eye, and I was looking right back at them, unblinking. The doorknob turned slowly. It was a metallic rasp that sounded like a scream in the silence of the storm. I sat in the heavy oak chair, my back to the wall, the shotgun resting across my knees. I didn't raise it yet. I wanted to see his face. I wanted to see the eyes of the boy I had carried on my shoulders at the county fair before I did what I had to do. The door pushed open and a silhouette filled the frame. It was Terrence, but he wasn't holding a flashlight like he had promised. In his right hand, dragging slightly against the floor, was my old aluminum baseball bat. The same bat I had bought him for Little League when he was 12. The irony was sharp enough to cut bone. Pop, he said softly, his voice trembling with a mix of fear and adrenaline. Put the gun down. We just want to talk. I didn't move. You don't bring a bat to a conversation, Terrence, I said, my voice low and steady. You bring a bat to a fight. He stepped into the room. The lightning flashed outside, casting a harsh blue light across his face. He looked wild. Sweat was dripping down his forehead and his eyes were wide and unblinking. He didn't look like a businessman anymore. He looked like a desperate junkie looking for a fix, and the fix was my silence. Victoria says you are dangerous, he hissed, stepping closer. She says you are going to ruin us. I can't let you do that, Pop. I have a family to think about. You have a father right here, I said, tightening my grip on the stock of the Remington. He lunged. It happened faster than I expected. For a man who had spent the last 10 years sitting in an office chair, Terrence moved with the explosive speed of panic. He swung the bat. It was a clumsy swing aimed at my head, but it had enough force to kill. I didn't shoot. God help me, I couldn't pull the trigger on my own son. Instead, I threw the shotgun to the side and raised my left arm to block. The metal bat connected with my forearm. The pain was blinding, a white-hot shock that traveled all the way to my shoulder. My bone didn't break, but it felt like it had turned to dust. I grunted, sliding out of the chair. Terrence raised the bat for a second strike, screaming something incoherent. He thought because he was 35 and I was 68 that he had the advantage. He thought youth and gym muscles were enough. He was wrong. I had spent 40 years wrestling with rusted engine blocks. I had spent decades applying torque to bolts that refused to move. My hands were not soft. They were calloused vices, made of steel and experience. When he swung down again, I stepped inside his guard. I ignored the screaming pain in my left arm and grabbed his wrist with my right hand. I didn't just grab it. I clamped down. I felt his tendons shift under my fingers. "Drop it," I growled. He tried to pull away, but I used his own momentum against him. It was simple physics. Leverage. I stepped behind him, kicking the back of his knee. His leg buckled. As he fell, I twisted his arm behind his back, pushing it high up toward his shoulder blades. He screamed, dropping the bat. It clattered loudly on the wooden floor, rolling away into the shadows. I slammed him face first into the wall. I held him there, my forearm pressed against the back of his neck. He was thrashing, trying to buck me off, but I leaned my weight into him. I knew exactly where to apply pressure to paralyze a man without permanently crippling him. It was a trick I learned in the mechanic shop when dealing with unruly customers back in the 80s. "Stop fighting me," I shouted into his ear. "Stop it before I break your arm." "You are crazy," he sobbed, his face pressed against the plaster. "You are assaulting me." I pulled him back and shoved him onto the floor. He scrambled backward, crab walking until he hit the legs of the desk. He looked up at me, terrified, clutching his shoulder. I stood over him, breathing hard, my injured arm throbbing in time with my heartbeat. I looked down at him. I didn't see a monster anymore. I saw a pathetic, weak man who had never learned that actions have consequences because his mother and I had always been there to catch him. "You think you are strong because you can swing a bat?" I said, my voice shaking with rage. "Strength isn't violence, Terrence. Strength is carrying a burden without breaking. And you break every time the wind blows." The door to the den swung open wider. Victoria stood there holding a battery-powered lantern. Darnell was behind her, peering over her shoulder like a frightened child. "Oh my God," Victoria shrieked, seeing her husband on the floor. "You animal! You attacked him!" I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket. My hand brushed against the bruise forming on my ribs, but I ignored it. I pulled out the second ledger. This one was thinner than the first, but the leather was black as midnight. I tossed it onto the floor. It landed with a heavy thud right between Terrence's legs. "Pick it up," I commanded. Victoria stepped forward suspiciously. "What is that?" "It is Darnell's turn," I said, looking straight at my youngest son. Darnell froze. He tried to back away into the hallway, but he bumped into the doorframe. "No, Pop," he whispered, his eyes filling with tears. "Please don't. Not that." I walked over and kicked the book open. It lay there on the floor, accusing us all. "Read the entry from November 4th, 2018, I said. "Read it, Darnell. Or do I need to read it for you?" Darnell shook his head violently, covering his ears with his hands. Stop it, please." Victoria looked confused. She looked from Darnell to the book. She bent down and picked it up, bringing the lantern closer. November 4th, she read aloud. $200,000, wire transfer to the law firm of Baker and McKenzie. Settlement agreement. Non-disclosure agreement signed. She looked up. $200,000. Darnell told me he won a scholarship for his MBA. He told me the tuition was paid for by a grant. I laughed. It was a dry, bitter sound. A grant. No, Victoria. That wasn't a grant. That was blood money. I looked at Darnell, who was now sobbing openly, sliding down the wall to sit on the floor. "Tell her what happened, Darnell," I said. "Tell her why your mother had to sell the creek lot, the land she was saving for her retirement villa. Tell her why she had to work 2 extra tax seasons while she was sick." He didn't answer. He just cried, rocking back and forth. He was drunk, I said, my voice cold. He was driving his truck down I-20 at 2 in the morning. He hit a car. A single mother was in that car. She didn't die, thank God, but her legs were crushed. She will never walk without a cane again. Victoria gasped, covering her mouth. "He fled the scene," I continued. "My son, the coward, fled the scene. He came home crying to Mommy. And Lucille." God bless her foolish heart, she couldn't bear the thought of her baby going to prison. So she hired the most expensive lawyer in the state. She negotiated a civil settlement to keep the criminal charges from sticking. She paid for that woman's surgeries. She paid for her silence. I pointed a shaking finger at Darnell. She saved your life that night. She saved your freedom. And how did you repay her? By letting your wife make fun of her cheap clothes, by complaining that the Christmas gifts weren't expensive enough, by standing there and watching Victoria feed her poison pills because she was taking too long to die. Darnell looked up, his face swollen and red. I wanted to tell you, Pop. I wanted to pay her back. But I couldn't. I was scared. Scared of what I asked. Scared of working hard. Scared of owning your mistake. I looked at Victoria. She was staring at Darnell with a look of pure disgust. But it wasn't moral disgust. It was the disgust of a predator realizing her partner was weak. You idiot, she hissed at Darnell. You told me that money was an inheritance from your grandmother. You told me you brought assets into this marriage. I didn't want you to leave me, Darnell wailed, reaching out for her leg. I knew you liked successful men. I didn't want you to know I was a criminal. I watched them. The dynamic had shifted. Victoria wasn't scared of the crime. She was angry about the deception. She was angry that the money she thought was hers was actually just a debt paid to keep him out of jail. I picked up the shotgun from the floor. I broke the barrel to show them it wasn't loaded anymore. I didn't need it. The truth was a heavier weapon than lead could ever be. Get up, I said to Terrence, who was still sitting on the floor nursing his arm. And you, Darnell, get up. Darnell scrambled to his feet, wiping his nose on his sleeve. He looked at me with a glimmer of hope. Pop, I am sorry. I will make it right. I will testify against Victoria. I will tell the police about the pills. Just don't let me go to jail for the accident, please. The statute of limitations hasn't run out. For a second I saw a path to victory. If Darnell turned on Victoria, I could end this tonight. I could have her arrested for the attempted murder of Lucille. But then Victoria laughed. It was a low, throaty sound that made the hair on my arms stand up. She walked over to Darnell and placed a hand on his cheek. It looked like a caress, but I could see her nails digging into his skin. You won't testify against anyone, sweetie, she purred. Darnell pulled away. Yes, I will. I can't do this anymore. I killed Mom. We killed Mom. Victoria leaned in close, her lips brushing his ear, but loud enough for me to hear. If you say one word to the police, Darnell, I will show them the other video. Darnell froze. His eyes went wide with a terror I had never seen before. Even worse than the night of the accident. What video, I asked, stepping forward. Victoria turned to me smiling, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Oh, Clarence, you think you are the only one who keeps secrets. Darnell has some hobbies that the church board wouldn't approve of, some late nights in hotels that wouldn't look good for a deacon's son. I have it all on my cloud. She looked back at Darnell. If I go down, you go down. And not just for the accident. I will ruin your reputation. I will ruin your marriage. You will be nothing. Darnell looked at me. He looked at the ledger on the floor. He looked at his brother, who was still groaning in pain. And then I saw the light go out in his eyes. The tiny spark of courage he had found a moment ago was extinguished by the fear of exposure. He slumped his shoulders. He looked down at his shoes. I am sorry, Pop, he whispered. I can't. I stood there in the center of the room, surrounded by the wreckage of my family. My eldest son who tried to beat me with a bat. My youngest son who was a coward held on a leash by his sins. And the woman who held the chains. I realized then that Lucille was right. The note on the safe wasn't a warning. It was a prophecy, beyond saving. I felt a cold calm wash over me. The anger was gone. The sadness was gone. There was only the calculation of what had to be done next. Get out, I said quietly. Victoria sneered. It is storming, Clarence. You can't make us leave in this weather. I walked to the front door and threw it open. The wind howled into the hallway, bringing rain and dead leaves with it. I said, get out. They looked at me. They saw the look in my eyes. They saw that the man who used to be their father had left the building. In his place was just a landlord evicting bad tenants. Terrence struggled to his feet, clutching his arm. Darnell kept his head down. Victoria buttoned her jacket, grabbing the lantern. "You will regret this, Clarence," she shouted over the wind as she herded them out. "You will die alone in this big house and nobody will find you for weeks." I watched them run to their cars through the pouring rain. I watched the taillights fade into the darkness. I closed the door and locked it. I slid the deadbolt home. I was alone. The house was dark. My arm was throbbing. My heart was broken. But for the first time in 3 years, the air in the house felt clean. The rot was gone. I walked back to the den and picked up the phone. The line was dead. The storm had taken the landline too. I sat down in the dark and waited for the morning. I had the ledgers. I had the drive. And I had a plan. They thought they had escaped. They thought the blackmail and the threats would keep them safe. But they forgot one thing. They forgot about the IRS. Blackmail works on people who have shame. But the tax man doesn't care about shame. He only cares about the numbers. And I had all the numbers right here in black and white. The sun rose over Atlanta with a deceptive beauty that morning. After the storm, the sky was a piercing, innocent blue, and the air smelled like wet pine needles and washed pavement. I had spent the night sitting in the chair in the den, my eyes gritty with exhaustion, watching the driveway through the blinds. I knew they would come back. People like Victoria and Terrence do not retreat. They just regroup. They reload. But I didn't expect the flashing blue lights. At 8 in the morning, 2 squad cars pulled up to my curb silently. No sirens. Just the heavy rolling crunch of tires on gravel. I watched as Victoria stepped out of the passenger seat of the lead car. She had changed clothes. Gone was the dusty pantsuit from yesterday. She was wearing a soft cardigan and modest slacks, looking every inch the concerned, grieving daughter-in-law. She wasn't alone. Beside her was a tall officer with a buzz cut and a face that looked like it was carved out of granite. I opened the front door before they could knock. I wanted to meet them on my feet, not hiding in my own house. "Mr. Henderson," the officer said, hooking his thumbs into his tactical vest. "I am Officer Miller. We received a call regarding a welfare check and a potential domestic disturbance involving a firearm." I looked at Victoria. She was dabbing her eyes with a tissue. She didn't look at me. She looked at the ground, her shoulders shaking with a performance that was worthy of an Oscar. "Officer," I said, my voice raspy from lack of sleep, "there is no disturbance here, just an old man having coffee." Victoria let out a small, choked sob. "See," she whispered to the officer, "he acts so normal. That is the scary part. He snaps in and out of it so fast. Yesterday, he didn't even know who I was. He thought I was a thief trying to steal his wife's jewelry. He pointed a shotgun at his own son officer. He is seeing things that aren't there." I felt the blood rise in my neck. "That is a lie," I said firmly. I pointed an unloaded weapon at intruders who were threatening me in my own home during a power outage. Officer Miller stepped onto the porch, his presence looming over me. "Sir, do you have a weapon in the house?" "I have a Remington shotgun," I answered honestly. "It is legal. It is registered, and it is currently locked in my gun safe as of 5 minutes ago." The officer looked at me then at the bruise on my arm where Terrence had hit me with the bat. It was purple and ugly, blooming across my forearm. "What happened to your arm, sir?" the officer asked. I opened my mouth to tell the truth. "To say my son attacked me." But Victoria cut in smooth as silk. "He fell," she said quickly, her voice dripping with concern. "He fell down the stairs last night, officer. We tried to help him up and he got violent. He thought we were attacking him. That is when he grabbed the gun. We were so scared we had to leave. We spent the night at a hotel, terrified he might hurt himself or someone else." She reached into her purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "This is why we called you," she continued, handing the paper to the officer. "We have been trying to get him help for months. This is a medical evaluation from Dr. Arrington. It confirms a diagnosis of early-onset dementia with paranoid delusions. We were scheduled to move him into a care facility next week, but he is resisting." I stared at the paper. Dr. Arrington. I had never met a Dr. Arrington in my life. My doctor was Dr. Sterling and had been for 20 years. "That is a forgery," I said, stepping forward. "I have never seen that doctor. I am perfectly sane." Officer Miller read the paper, frowning. It looked official. It had a letterhead. It had a signature. It had medical codes that looked legitimate to a layman. He looked up at me, and his eyes had changed. He wasn't looking at a homeowner anymore. He was looking at a liability. He was looking at a confused, violent senior citizen who needed to be managed. "Sir," the officer said, his hand resting near his taser. "I need you to step out onto the porch and keep your hands where I can see them. We need to secure the premises and ensure you aren't a danger to yourself." "I am not a danger," I insisted, my voice rising. "I am the victim here. This woman is trying to steal my estate. She is lying to you." "He is getting agitated again," Victoria whimpered, stepping behind the officer for protection. "Please don't let him hurt me." "Sir." "Step out now," the officer commanded, his voice hard. I stepped out. The morning sun felt hot on my face. I felt a wave of dizziness, not from dementia, but from the sheer weight of the injustice crashing down on me. I looked at my neighbors' houses. Mrs. Johnson was peering through her curtains. The mailman was pausing at the corner. To them, it looked exactly like what Victoria wanted, a crazy old man being handled by the police. Officer Miller took my arm. It wasn't gentle. He spun me around and pushed me against the wall of the house. "Am I under arrest?" I asked, my cheek pressed against the siding. "You are being detained for a mental health evaluation," the officer said, patting me down. "Under the code, we can hold you for 72 hours if we believe you are a threat. Based on the statement from your family and this medical report, I have probable cause to believe you are experiencing a psychotic break." 72 hours. I knew exactly what that meant. In 72 hours, Victoria would change the locks. She would raid the safe. She would destroy the ledgers. She would find the USB drive if she tore the house apart fast enough. By the time I got out drugged up on antipsychotics, I didn't need, everything would be gone. My credibility would be zero. I would be just another senile old man rambling about conspiracies. It was a perfect trap. Cold, efficient, evil. I looked at Victoria. She was watching me being frisked, and for a split second, the mask dropped. She smiled. It was a tiny, triumphant smile. "Officer," I said, trying to keep the panic out of my voice, "before you put me in that car, I have a right to make a call. I have a right to legal counsel. You can call a lawyer from the hospital, sir," the officer said, reaching for his handcuffs. "No," I said. "I am not under arrest. You said so yourself. I am a citizen standing on his own property. Unless you are charging me with a crime, I am allowed to use my phone. Or are you violating my civil rights because you believe a piece of paper over the man standing in front of you?" The officer paused. He knew the law. He knew he was walking a fine line. "Make it quick," he said, stepping back but keeping his hand on his belt. I reached into my pocket with a shaking hand. I didn't dial 911. I dialed the number I had memorized from the business card Lucille had taped inside her Bible. It rang once, twice. Victoria stepped forward. "Who is he calling?" she demanded. "He is probably calling one of his imaginary friends, or buying another gun. Officer, you can't let him do this." The line clicked open. "Hello," a voice said. Sharp, professional, awake. "Althea," I said. "This is Clarence Henderson, Lucille's husband." There was a pause on the other end. Then the voice softened but lost none of its steel. "Clarence, I have been expecting this call ever since Lucille passed. What is the situation?" "The police are here," I said, staring right at Victoria. "My daughter-in-law has presented a fake document from a Dr. Arrington claiming I have dementia. They are about to take me in on a 72-hour hold." I heard the sound of a chair scraping back and keys jingling on the other end. "Clarence, listen to me," Althea said. "Do not get in that car. Do not sign anything. Do not say another word to anyone. Put the officer on the phone. Now." I held the phone out to Officer Miller. "My lawyer wants to speak to you," I said. The officer sighed, rolling his eyes, but he took the phone. "Officer Miller," he said into the receiver, his tone bored. I watched his face. Within 10 seconds, the boredom vanished. His spine straightened. He looked at the phone with sudden respect bordering on fear. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "No, ma'am, I didn't know that." "Yes, I see." "No, we haven't handcuffed him yet." "Yes, ma'am, we will wait right here." He handed the phone back to me like it was made of hot coal. "Who is that?" Victoria asked, her voice losing its fake sweetness. "Who did you call?" That Officer Miller said, looking at Victoria with a new suspicion, was Althea Gibson. "She says she is 5 minutes away, and she says if I move you 1 inch from this porch, she will have my badge and a lawsuit filed before lunch." Victoria's face went pale. She knew the name. Everyone in Atlanta who knew anything about power knew the name Althea Gibson. She wasn't just a lawyer. She was a civil rights legend. She was the woman who sued the city in the 90s and won. She was the woman who ate sharks like Brad the broker for breakfast. We waited. The 5 minutes felt like 5 hours. Victoria paced by the squad car, making frantic phone calls that nobody answered. I stood on the porch, my arms crossed, leaning against the railing. I was tired. My body hurt, but my mind was clearing. The fog of fear was lifting. Then we heard it. The low hum of a luxury engine. A black town car turned the corner. It moved slowly, majestically, like a hearse coming to bury the wicked. It pulled into the driveway, blocking the police cars in. The driver's door didn't open. The back door opened. Althea Gibson stepped out. She was a small woman in her 70s with skin the color of deep mahogany and silver hair pulled back into an elegant bun. She was wearing a cream-colored suit that looked like armor. She carried a leather briefcase that looked heavy. She walked with a cane, but she didn't use it for support. She used it like a scepter. She walked past the police cars. She walked past Victoria without even looking at her. She walked straight up the steps to me. She looked at my bruised arm. She looked at my tired eyes. She reached out and touched my hand gently. "Hello, Clarence," she said. "Lucille told me you were stubborn. She didn't say you were handsome, too." She turned around to face the lawn. "Officer Miller," she said, her voice projecting like she was in a courtroom. "I am representing Mr. Henderson. I have in my briefcase a sworn affidavit from Dr. Sterling, Mr. Henderson's primary care physician of 20 years, dated yesterday morning, confirming that Mr. Henderson is of sound mind and excellent mental health." She pulled a document from her bag and held it up. "I also have a copy of the deed to this house, which lists the owner as the Lucille Henderson Trust. And I have a copy of the restraining order I am filing right now against Mrs. Victoria Henderson for elder abuse fraud and filing a false police report." Victoria gasped. "You can't do that," she screeched. "That report is real. Dr. Arrington is a specialist." Althea finally looked at her. She lowered her glasses and looked Victoria up and down with a gaze that could peel paint. "Dr. Arrington," she said calmly, "is a chiropractor, Victoria. I looked him up on the way here. He is also your cousin's husband, is he not? Since when is a chiropractor qualified to diagnose dementia?" The silence that followed was delicious. Officer Miller looked at Victoria, and his hand moved away from his taser and rested on his handcuffs again. But this time, he wasn't looking at me. "Mrs. Henderson," the officer said, his voice cold. "Is that true? Is this document signed by a chiropractor?" Victoria stammered. It is a medical opinion. He is a doctor." Althea stepped forward. "Officer, I suggest you ask this woman to leave my client's property immediately before I add trespassing to the list of charges I am preparing. And I suggest you verify documents before you threaten to detain a senior citizen based on the word of a woman who is currently under investigation for embezzlement." "Embezzlement?" Victoria squeaked. "Oh yes," Althea smiled, and it was a smile full of sharp teeth. "We opened the safe, Victoria. We have the ledgers. We have the video. The game is over." Officer Miller looked at me. "I am sorry for the misunderstanding, Mr. Henderson." He turned to Victoria. "Ma'am, you need to leave, now. Or I will arrest you for filing a false report right here." Victoria looked at me. She looked at Althea. She looked at the house she had tried so hard to steal. Her face twisted into a mask of ugly hate. "This isn't over," she hissed. "Terrence will never forgive you. You will never see your grandchild." I didn't answer. I didn't have to. Althea answered for me. "My client doesn't negotiate with terrorists, Victoria. Goodbye." We watched her get into her car and speed away, tires screeching. The police officer tipped his hat to Althea and got back in his car, following Victoria to ensure she left the neighborhood. I stood there on the porch and my legs finally gave out. I sat down heavily on the steps. Althea sat down next to me, ignoring the dust on her expensive suit. "You okay, Clarence?" she asked. "I am tired, Althea," I said. "I am so tired." "I know," she said, patting my knee. "But you can't rest yet. We won the battle. But the war is just starting. Lucille left us a mess, Clarence. But she also left us the broom. Are you ready to sweep?" I looked at the blue sky. I took a deep breath. "Yes," I said. "Let's clean house." Althea Gibson did not shout. She did not wave her arms. She sat on the concrete steps of my front porch with the poise of a queen holding court. She placed her leather briefcase on her knees and clicked the brass latches open. The sound was sharp and decisive like the cocking of a pistol. Victoria was standing by the patrol car, her arms crossed over her chest, watching us with a mixture of apprehension and arrogance. Officer Miller stood between us, his hand resting on his belt, waiting to see who actually held the power in this situation. Althea pulled out a document bound in blue legal paper. It was thick. It looked heavy. She smoothed it out on her lap and adjusted her glasses. "Officer Miller," she said, her voice projecting clearly across the lawn, "Mrs. Henderson here claims that she has the right to manage this property because her father-in-law is incapacitated. She claims that as the wife of the heir, she has a vested interest in the estate. Is that correct?" Victoria stepped forward, chin high. "That is exactly right," she said, her voice shrill. "My husband Terence is the sole heir. If Clarence is incompetent, we have power of attorney. We have a right to liquidate assets to pay for his care." Althea smiled. It was a cold smile. "That would be true, Victoria," Althea said. "If Clarence owned this house." Victoria froze. Her brow furrowed. "What are you talking about?" she snapped. "Of course he owns it. He built it. His name is on the mailbox." Althea turned the document around so the officer could see the title page. "Actually, Clarence hasn't owned this house for 10 years, she said. "In 2014, Lucille Henderson visited my office. She was concerned about the financial stability of her children. She was concerned about predatory marriages, so she made a very smart move." Althea tapped the paper with a manicured fingernail. She transferred the deed of this property and the surrounding acreage into the Lucille Henderson Irrevocable Trust. Clarence is not the owner. He is merely the life tenant. I watched Victoria's face. I saw the gears turning in her head, trying to process the legalese. I knew she was a real estate agent. I knew she understood contracts, but I also knew she had never bothered to look up the actual title of my home because she assumed I was just a simple mechanic who didn't know how to protect his assets. "What does that mean?" Officer Miller asked, leaning in to look at the paper. "It means," Althea explained, enjoying every syllable, "that Clarence has the right to live here until his death. He has the right to modify the property. He has the right to paint the walls blue or turn the office into a library. But he does not have the right to sell it. And more importantly, neither does his son, and neither does his daughter-in-law." Victoria let out a laugh of disbelief. "That is ridiculous," she scoffed. "A trust. We can dissolve a trust. If Clarence is declared incompetent, the trustees take over, and Terence is the next of kin, so he would be the trustee." Althea turned the page. The paper rustled loudly in the quiet morning air. "I am afraid you are mistaken again, Victoria," Althea said. "Lucille was very specific about the trustees. Terence is not a trustee. Darnell is not a trustee." "Who is the trustee?" Victoria demanded, taking a step closer, her hands balling into fists. "I am," Althea said simply. The color drained from Victoria's face so fast it looked like she might faint. "You," she whispered. "Me," Althea confirmed. "And the secondary trustee is the Ebenezer Baptist Church Building Fund. If Clarence becomes incapacitated, the management of the property falls to me. If I die, it falls to the church." At no point does the title transfer to Terence or his spouse. Victoria looked like she had been slapped. She grabbed the hood of the police car to steady herself, but the inheritance, she stammered. "When Clarence dies, the house goes to the boys. That is how it works. It is family property." Althea flipped to page 12 of the document. She held it up. "Let's read the distribution clause, shall we?" Althea said. Clause 4, Section B. "Upon the death of the life tenant, the property shall not be sold. It shall be retained by the trust and converted into a charitable facility for the housing of victims of domestic abuse." "No," Victoria screamed. The sound tore from her throat, raw and ugly. "That is a lie. That is not legal. You can't disinherit your own children like that." "It is perfectly legal," Althea said, closing the folder with a snap. "It is a private asset. Lucille purchased the land with money she inherited from her grandmother before she married Clarence. It was her separate property. She had every right to dispose of it as she saw fit, and she saw fit to keep it out of the hands of people who would sell it for a quick payout." I sat there on the steps and I felt a warmth spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the sun. It was pride. Lucille. My brilliant, quiet Lucille. She had sat in that office 10 years ago while Terrence was stealing from the shop and Victoria was spending our money on vacations, and she had seen the future. She knew they would come for the house. She knew they would try to throw me out. So she built a fortress of paper and ink that they could never breach. Victoria was shaking her head violently. "No," she muttered. "No. We ran the numbers. The land alone is worth $2 million. We leveraged the loans against this inheritance. We promised the investors." Althea said, picking up on the word. "Investors. You took out loans against an asset you didn't own. That sounds like fraud, Victoria." Victoria looked up, her eyes wild. She realized she had said too much. "This is a forgery," she yelled, pointing at the document. "Lucille wouldn't do this. She loved her sons. You tricked her. You are a crooked lawyer, and I will report you to the Bar Association. I want to see the original. I want a forensic analysis of the signature." Althea reached into her briefcase again. She pulled out a small black velvet pouch. She opened it and took out a notary stamp. An old one. "I notarized this myself," Victoria Althea said, "in the presence of 2 witnesses. One was the pastor, the other was the bank manager. Do you want to call them? They are both still alive, and I am sure they would love to testify about the state of Lucille's mind when she signed this. She was heartbroken, Victoria. She told us she was doing this because she was afraid her daughter-in-law would put her husband on the street." I stood up then. My legs felt stronger. The dizziness was gone. I walked down the steps, past Althea, past the stunned police officer, until I was standing right in front of Victoria. She looked at me. For the first time, there was real fear in her eyes. Not the fake fear she performed for the police, but the deep, guttural fear of a person realizing the ground has vanished beneath their feet. "You thought I was stupid," I said softly. "You thought because I work with grease and metal that I couldn't understand contracts. You thought because Lucille was quiet that she was weak." I pointed to the document in Althea's lap. "Read the date, Victoria," I said. She looked down. August 12th, 2014. I watched the recognition hit her. "August 12th, I said. "Does that date ring a bell?" She swallowed hard. "That was the day you and Terrence came back from Las Vegas," I said. "That was the day Lucille found out about the $4,000 you stole for that trip. While you were at the casino spending our retirement money, Lucille was sitting in Althea's office protecting what was left. You created this," I said, my voice hard as iron. "Every line in that contract was written by your greed. You forced her to do this." Victoria looked at the officer. "Officer, this is a civil matter," she said, her voice shaking. "I want to leave. I have to call my husband." Officer Miller looked at Althea. "Counselor, is everything here in order?" "It is completely in order," Officer Althea said, standing up. "The medical report this woman provided is a fake. The claim of ownership is false, and Mr. Henderson is the legal resident of this property with full authority to decide who steps foot on it." Officer Miller turned to Victoria. "Ma'am," he said, his voice dropping an octave, "you need to get in your car. If you return to this property, I will arrest you for trespassing. And if I find out that medical report is forged, I will be paying you a visit with a warrant. Do you understand?" Victoria didn't answer. She couldn't. She was hyperventilating. The walls of her future, the millions she thought she had secured, were crumbling down around her. She looked at the house one last time. It wasn't an asset anymore. It was a tombstone for her ambitions. She scrambled into the passenger seat of her car. She slammed the door so hard the window rattled. I watched as she fumbled with her phone, dialing frantically, probably calling Terrence, probably screaming at him that they were ruined. The patrol car backed out of the driveway first, then Victoria's car followed. She didn't look back. I stood on the lawn and took a deep breath of the pine-scented air. "Thank you, Althea," I said, turning to her. She smiled and put the document back in her briefcase. "Don't thank me, Clarence," she said. "Thank Lucille. She told me 10 years ago that this day would come. She made me promise to be ready." I looked at the house, my beautiful, sturdy brick house. It wasn't just a building, it was a shield. Lucille had died 3 years ago, but she was still protecting me. She was still standing between me and the wolves. Althea snapped her briefcase shut. "Now," she said, checking her watch, "we have dealt with the house, but we still have the matter of the ledgers and the attempted murder charge. Are you ready for round 2? I looked at the empty street where Victoria had vanished. "I am ready," I said. "Let's finish them." Officer Miller walked over to his car but stopped and looked back at me. "Mr. Henderson," he said. "Yes, officer." You have a good lawyer, he said, nodding at Althea. And sir, yes. I am sorry about your son. I looked at him. I nodded slowly. I don't have a son, officer, I said. Not anymore. He tipped his hat and drove away. I turned back to Althea. Come inside, I said. I think it is time we open the second safe. Althea looked surprised. There is a second safe, she asked. I smiled. A small, sad smile. Lucille didn't just hide the paperwork, Althea, I said. She hid the cash too. But she didn't leave it to me. She left it for the war chest. Come on. We have work to do. You thought it was over. You thought the trust fund was the final nail in the coffin. But Victoria was not a woman who accepted defeat. She was a woman who would burn the world down just to be king of the ashes. We were standing in the hallway. Althea was putting the deed back into her briefcase. Officer Miller was walking toward his car. The air was starting to feel lighter. But then Victoria stopped. She stood by her car door and she didn't get in. She looked at Terrence, who was slumped against the hood looking like a broken man. Then she looked at her stomach. She turned around. Her face had changed again. The fear was gone. In its place was a cold, hard resolve that made my skin crawl. She walked back toward the porch. Her steps were slow and deliberate. She placed both hands on her belly in a gesture that was as old as time. You can't do this, Clarence, she said. Her voice wasn't loud. It was soft. It was the voice of a mother. I looked at her. What now, Victoria? The police are leaving. You should go with them. You can't kick us out, she said, stepping onto the first step. You can't cut us off. Not now. Not when you know what is at stake. I don't care what is at stake, I said. She smiled. It was a sad little smile, the kind that wins juries over. Even if it is your own flesh and blood, she asked. Terrence looked up. His eyes widened. He scrambled away from the car and ran to her side. Vic, he stammered. Are you really? She nodded, looking deep into his eyes. I am 3 months along, Terrence. I was going to surprise you on your birthday. We are having a son. Terrence let out a sound that was half laugh and half sob. He fell to his knees and wrapped his arms around her waist, burying his face in her stomach. Oh my God, he cried. A son! Pop, did you hear that? I am going to be a father. You are going to be a grandfather. Victoria stroked his hair, but her eyes were locked on mine. They were challenging me. They were daring me to be the monster she painted me as. You can't evict a pregnant woman, Clarence, she said softly. You can't leave your grandson homeless. This baby is the future of the Henderson name. He is the legacy Lucille wanted. If you throw us out now, the stress could cause a miscarriage. Is that what you want? Do you want to be responsible for killing the last piece of your wife that is left in this world? It was a brilliant move. It was evil, but it was brilliant. She knew Lucille's greatest sorrow was that we didn't have grandchildren. She knew that I was a man who valued family above everything. She was using an unborn child as a human shield. Terrence stood up, his face beaming with a hope that was painful to watch. Pop, please. Forget the money, forget the house. This changes everything. I will change, I swear. I will get a job. I will do whatever you want. Just let us stay. Let us raise him here. Mom would have wanted that. I looked at my son. He was so happy. For the first time in years, he looked like the boy I used to know. He believed her. He wanted this so badly that he was blind to everything else. But I wasn't blind. And Lucille certainly hadn't been blind. I felt a heaviness in my chest. This was going to be the hardest thing I ever had to do. Breaking his arm was nothing compared to breaking his heart. But the truth had to be told. The infection had to be cut out completely. Come inside, I said. My voice was flat, dead. Victoria smiled triumphantly. She thought she had won. She thought the emotional blackmail had worked. She took Terrence's arm and led him back up the stairs past Althea, who was watching them with a look of deep pity. We went back into the living room. The dust from the fight was still settling. The broken laptop was still on the floor. Sit down, I said, pointing to the sofa. Victoria sat down heavily, still holding her stomach, acting the part of the fragile mother. Terrence sat next to her, holding her hand like it was made of glass. So Clarence, Victoria said, settling in, I assume we can discuss the terms of our stay. We will need the master bedroom, of course. It has the best light for the nursery." I didn't answer her. I walked over to the fireplace where I had left the third ledger, the one I hadn't opened yet. It was a small red notebook. It didn't look like much, but inside it was the nuclear option. I picked it up. I turned to Althea. "Althea, do you have the file from the private investigator?" I asked. Althea nodded. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a thick manila envelope sealed with red tape. She handed it to me without a word. "What is this?" Terrence asked, his smile faltering. "What is going on, Pop? We are talking about the baby. We are talking about the baby." I agreed. I opened the red notebook. "Terrence," I said, "do you remember 5 years ago when you and Victoria were trying to conceive the first time? You went to see Dr. Sterling. You told me it was just a routine checkup." Terrence frowned. "Yeah. So what? We were stressed. It didn't happen." I pulled a piece of paper out of the notebook. It was a medical report. It was on Dr. Sterling's letterhead. "Lucille paid for those tests, Terrence," I said. "You didn't have insurance because you had let the policy lapse to pay for your car lease, so the results came to her." I walked over and handed him the paper. "Read the diagnosis, Terrence. Read the highlighted line." Terrence took the paper. His hands were shaking. He squinted at the medical jargon. "Azoospermia," he read slowly. "Secondary infertility induced by prolonged anabolic steroid use." He stopped. He looked up at me, confusion clouding his eyes. "What does that mean?" "It means you are sterile, Terrence," I said gently. "It means you have a 0 sperm count. It means you cannot father children." The room went deadly silent. Terrence looked at the paper. Then he looked at Victoria. Victoria, who had gone rigid on the sofa. "No," he whispered. "That is wrong. The doctor said we just had low motility. He said we just needed to keep trying. Victoria told me..." He stopped. He looked at his wife. "You told me the tests were fine," he said, his voice rising. "You told me it was just stress. You told me to keep taking those supplements." Victoria wouldn't look at him. She was staring at the wall, her face a mask of stone. "She lied, Terrence," I said. "She knew. Dr. Sterling told both of you. But she told you to keep it a secret because she didn't want to hurt your pride. Or maybe because she wanted to keep the option open." "Option?" Terrence asked. "What option?" I opened the manila envelope Althea had given me. I pulled out a stack of photographs. Glossy, high-resolution photographs taken with a telephoto lens. "Lucille knew something was wrong," I said. "When you told us Victoria was pregnant last week, Lucille hired a professional. She wanted to know the truth before she died." I tossed the photos onto the coffee table. They fanned out like a deck of cards. They were brutal. There was Victoria, but she wasn't with Terrence. She was walking into a Motel 6 off the interstate. She was sitting at a bar holding hands with a man in a cheap suit, a man I recognized. "Brad," I said, pointing to the photo, "the real estate broker, the man who was here yesterday trying to sell my house." Terrence stared at the photos. He stared at his wife kissing another man. He stared at his wife walking into a motel room with another man. "The dates on these photos are from 3 months ago," I said, "the exact time of conception." Terrence made a sound like a wounded animal, a low guttural keen that started in his chest and ripped its way out of his throat. He looked at Victoria. His eyes were wide and red. "Is it true?" he screamed. Victoria didn't deny it. She couldn't. The evidence was right there in full color. She stood up, pushing Terrence's hand away. "So what if it is?" she snapped. Her voice was vicious now. "So what, Terrence? You weren't man enough to give me a child. You weren't man enough to give me money. You weren't man enough to stand up to your daddy. I had to do what I had to do. You cheated on me." Terrence yelled, standing up. He was shaking so hard he could barely stand. "You are pregnant with another man's baby, and you tried to pass it off as mine. You tried to trick my father into giving us the house." "I didn't try to trick him," Victoria yelled back, getting right in his face. "I tried to save us. Brad has money, Terrence. Brad has connections, and he is twice the man you will ever be. At least he can finish what he starts." Terrence slapped her. It was a sharp crack that echoed through the room. Victoria didn't cry. She laughed. She touched her cheek and laughed. "That is the first time you have ever shown any backbone," she spat. "Too bad it is 5 years too late." Terrence lunged at her. He grabbed her by the shoulders and shook her. "You ruined my life," he screamed. "You made me steal from my parents. You made me kill my mother. And for what? For a bastard child and a real estate commission." I stepped forward. I grabbed Terrence and pulled him back, not to protect her, but to stop him from going to prison for assault. "Enough," I shouted. Terrence collapsed onto the floor, sobbing. He curled into a ball, clutching the medical report in one hand and the photos in the other. He was broken. Completely and utterly broken. Victoria straightened her blouse. She looked at me with pure hatred. "Are you happy now, Clarence?" she asked. "You destroyed your family. You exposed everything. Was it worth it?" I looked at her. I looked at the wreckage of my son on the floor. I looked at Althea, who was watching with a sad, grim expression. "I didn't destroy this family, Victoria," I said quietly. "I just turned on the lights. You were the roaches scurrying in the dark." Victoria grabbed her purse. She didn't look at Terrence. She stepped over him like he was a piece of trash. "I am leaving," she said. "And don't worry, you won't see me again. I have better places to be. And Brad has a penthouse." She walked to the door. She paused and looked back at Terrence. "Send me the divorce papers," she said coldly. "And keep the ring. It was a fake diamond anyway, just like you." She walked out. The door slammed shut behind her. Terrence lay on the floor crying. He was muttering to himself. "I didn't know. I didn't know. I am sterile. It wasn't my baby." I stood over him. I felt no pity, only a deep, hollow exhaustion. Althea walked over and put a hand on my shoulder. "Clarence," she said softly, "the police are gone. But we still have to report this. The fraud, the embezzlement." I looked down at my son. "Do it," I said. "Call them back." Terrence looked up. "Pop, no, please. She is gone. Let me go. I have nothing left." "You have your freedom, Terrence," I said, "and you used it to destroy everything I built. You used it to hurt your mother." I picked up the phone and handed it to Althea. "Call them," I repeated. Terrence crawled toward me, grabbing my pant leg. "Pop, please. I am your son." I looked down at him. I looked at the man who had tried to beat me with a baseball bat, the man who had let his wife poison his mother. "My son died a long time ago, Terrence," I said. "I don't know who you are, but you are trespassing." I pulled my leg away and walked to the window. I watched the street, waiting for the blue lights to return. I didn't cry. I had no tears left. I just watched and waited for justice to finally arrive. The front door had clicked shut, but the echo of Victoria's departure still hung in the air like smoke after a fire. The house was finally quiet, but it was the silence of a graveyard, not a sanctuary. I stood by the window watching the empty street where she had vanished, and then I turned slowly to face the wreckage she had left behind. My two sons, the blood of my blood. The men Lucille and I had raised to be strong and righteous were currently scattered on my living room floor like broken toys. Terrence was still curled in a ball, clutching the photographs of his wife's infidelity as if they were the only things anchoring him to reality. Darnell was sitting with his back against the wall, his face buried in his hands, shaking with silent sobs. They looked pathetic. They looked small. And God help me, part of my heart still wanted to go to them. Part of me wanted to kneel down and pick them up and tell them it would be okay, just like I did when they scraped their knees in the driveway 30 years ago. But I stayed where I was. That part of me was dying. It was being suffocated by the cold, hard truth of who they had become. Althea stood next to me, her presence solid and unshakable. She looked at them with the dispassionate eye of a judge who had seen too many criminals cry only after the handcuffs were locked. She adjusted her glasses and looked at me. Her eyes asked a question I wasn't sure I was ready to answer. "Are we done, Clarence?" she seemed to ask. I took a deep breath. The air in the room felt thin. I walked over to the coffee table and picked up the red ledger, the book that proved they knew about the pills, the book that proved they knew Victoria was hastening their mother's death and did nothing. "Get up," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it cut through their sobbing like a knife. Terrence looked up. His eyes were red and swollen, his expensive shirt crumpled and stained with tears. "Pop," he whispered. "She is gone. She took everything. My marriage. My child. It was all a lie." "Get up," I repeated. Slowly, painfully, they scrambled to their feet. They stood before me, heads bowed, shoulders slumped, two men who had lost their spines somewhere between the bank and the country club. I looked at them for a long moment. I let the silence stretch until it was unbearable. "Victoria is gone," I said. But her crimes remain, and your crimes remain. Darnell flinched. Pop, please, he begged. We didn't do it. It was her. She manipulated us. She made us do it. Stop it, I snapped. Stop blaming the woman. She was the architect, yes, but you were the builders. You carried the bricks. You mixed the mortar. You watched your mother fade away day by day, and you calculated how much money you would save on nursing care if she died a little sooner. No, Terrence shouted, his voice cracking. That isn't fair. We loved Mom. You loved her money, I said. I looked at Althea. She opened her briefcase and pulled out 2 documents. They were standard witness cooperation agreements. She had typed them up that morning, knowing it might come to this. I am going to give you 1 chance, I said. Just 1. And I want you to listen to me very carefully because your lives depend on it. I pointed to the papers in Althea's hand. Althea is going to call the district attorney, I said. We are going to hand over the ledgers. We are going to hand over the hard drive with the video of Lucille. We are going to charge Victoria with fraud, embezzlement, elder abuse, and attempted murder. Terrence went pale. Murder, he whispered. Attempted murder, I corrected. She messed with a heart patient's medication. That is a felony, Terrence. And you 2 are accomplices. You knew. Darnell heard her say it. You saw the pills. By law, you are just as guilty as she is. Darnell started to hyperventilate. I can't go to jail, Pop. I have a family. I have kids. Then fix it, I said. I took the papers from Althea and slammed them down on the coffee table. Sign these, I commanded. These are statements. You will go on record. You will testify that Victoria masterminded the fraud. You will testify that she introduced the pills. You will testify that she forged the documents. You will turn state's evidence against her. I looked them in the eye. If you do this, Althea will negotiate for you. We will ask for immunity or reduced charges for your part in the financial crimes. You will still have to pay back the IRS. You will still be broke. But you won't go to prison for killing your mother. And you might just save a sliver of your souls. It was a lifeline. It was more than they deserved. It was a father throwing a rope to his drowning sons even after they had tried to sink his boat. I watched them. I waited for them to grab the pen. I waited for them to say, yes, Pop, we will do it. We will make it right. We will get justice for Mom. But they didn't move. Terrence looked at the paper. Then he looked at me. Then his eyes shifted to the side. The calculation began. I could see it happening in real time. The gears of self-preservation were turning, grinding down the last remnants of his conscience. If I testify, he said slowly, his voice trembling. If I admit that I knew about the fraud, that means I admit to the embezzlement too. The IRS will look at everything. They will look at the shell companies. They are going to look anyway, I said. But this way you are the witness, not the target. Terrence shook his head. No, Pop, you don't understand. I signed those checks. Victoria made me sign them, but it is my signature. If I go to court and say I knew about the scheme, they won't give me immunity. They will say I was the CFO. They will say I was responsible. He looked at me with pleading eyes. Pop, if we just let her go, if we just don't say anything, maybe the IRS won't find out about the pills. Maybe we can just pay the back taxes and work out a payment plan. If we bring up the murder charge, it opens a Pandora's box. It makes it a high-profile case. My face will be on the news. I will never work in this town again. I felt a coldness spread through my stomach. He wasn't thinking about justice for Lucille. He was thinking about his career. He was thinking about his reputation. I turned to Darnell. What about you, son? You were the one crying on the floor about how sorry you were. You were the one she blackmailed. Here is your chance to be free of her. Testify. Put her away so she can't hurt you anymore. Darnell looked at the pen. He reached for it, his hand shaking. But then he stopped. He pulled his hand back as if the pen were red hot. I can't, he whispered. Why, I asked. My voice was barely a whisper now. Why Darnell? She has the video, he choked out, the one she told me about. If I testify against her, she will release it. She will put it on the internet. Everyone will see. The church, my wife, my kids. Pop, it will ruin my life. I stared at him. Your mother is dead, I said. She died gasping for air because that woman poisoned her. And you are worried about a video. You are worried about being embarrassed. It is not just embarrassment, Darnell sobbed. It is my life, Pop. I can't lose my family. You already lost your family, I said. You lost us the day you chose her over the woman who gave birth to you. I looked back at Terrence. And you, I said. You are worried about your job. You are worried about being known as a thief. Terrence straightened up a little, trying to regain some dignity that wasn't there. It is practical, Pop. If I go to jail, I can't pay back the taxes. I need to be able to earn. We should just focus on the financial settlement. Let Victoria go. She is ruined anyway. Why drag Mom's name through the mud with a murder trial? Let the dead rest in peace. Let the dead rest in peace. That was the phrase that did it. That was the moment the last thread snapped. He wasn't protecting Lucille's memory. He was using her memory to hide his own cowardice. I looked at Althea. She was closing her briefcase. She didn't need to hear anymore. She knew. She had seen this 100 times in her career. The moment when a criminal decides that saving their own skin is worth more than the truth. I laughed. It was a sound that startled them. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was a dry, hollow sound, like dead leaves scraping on pavement. You act like you have a choice, I said. I walked over to the table and picked up the papers. I ripped them in half. Then I ripped them again. The sound of tearing paper was loud in the room. You think I was asking for your permission? I asked, throwing the confetti of their last chance into the air. You think I need your testimony to bury her? I walked closer to them. I stood tall, my mechanic's back straight, my eyes clear. I gave you a chance, I said. Chance. Not for me, not for the case. I gave you a chance for yourselves. I wanted to see if there was anything left inside of you that was worth saving. I wanted to see if you were men or if you were just hollow shells wearing expensive suits. I looked at Terrence. I don't need you to testify about the money. I have the bank records. I have the forensic accounting. The numbers don't lie, Terrence. You do. I looked at Darnell. And I don't need you to verify the pills. The video of your mother is admissible as a dying declaration. And Dr. Sterling's testimony about the medication interaction is scientific fact. The jury won't need a coward to tell them what they can see with their own eyes. They stared at me, eyes wide with horror, realizing they had just failed the only test that mattered. You calculated, I said, shaking my head. You stood there and you did the math. You weighed your mother's life against your own comfort, and you chose comfort. Again. Just like you did for 10 years. Pop, wait, Terrence stammered, reaching out. We can still help. We can... No, I cut him off. You can't. You are done helping. You are done talking. I turned to Althea. Call the district attorney, Althea. Tell him we are filing everything. The fraud, the theft, the attempted murder. And tell him we have 2 CO conspirators who refuse to cooperate. Tell him I want them charged to the fullest extent of the law. Althea nodded solemnly. Consider it done, Clarence. Darnell fell to his knees again, wailing. Pop, no, please, not prison. I am your son. I looked down at him. I looked at the tears streaming down his face, and I felt nothing. The well was dry. You are not my son, I said, my voice cold and final. My sons died a long time ago. I don't know who you people are. But you are trespassing in my house. I pointed to the door. Get out. They didn't move. They were paralyzed by the shock of it. I said, get out. I roared, my voice shaking the walls. Get out before I throw you out. Terrence grabbed Darnell by the arm and hauled him up. They stumbled toward the door, looking back at me with terrified eyes, waiting for me to relent, waiting for me to be the soft father I had always been. But that father was gone. He was buried in the cemetery next to Lucille. I watched them stumble out onto the porch and down the steps. I watched them get into Terrence's car. I watched them drive away, leaving nothing but exhaust fumes and silence. I closed the door. I locked the deadbolt. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood and closed my eyes. It was over. The house was empty. My family was gone. But as I stood there in the quiet, I felt something strange. I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. The heavy, suffocating blanket of lies was gone. The toxic hope that had kept me sick was gone. I turned around and looked at Althea. She was already on the phone, dialing the number that would end their lives as they knew them. I walked to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. My hands were steady. I was alone, but for the first time in years, I was clean. The house was finally quiet. The storm outside had passed, leaving behind a wet world that smelled of mud and ozone. Inside, the air was still thick with the ghosts of the family I had just evicted. I stood in the kitchen staring at the coffee maker Lucille used every morning for 30 years. My hands were gripping the granite counter so hard my knuckles were white. It was over. The shouting was over. The threats were over. My sons were gone. But Althea was not done. She was sitting at the kitchen table, her briefcase open like a surgeon's kit. She was on the phone, her voice low and dangerous. She wasn't talking to the police anymore. She was talking to someone much more frightening. "Yes, Agent Perkins," she said into the phone. "I am looking at the amended returns right now. Yes, the signatures do not match the exemplars I provided. We are prepared to surrender the original documents for forensic analysis. Thank you." She hung up the phone and took off her glasses, rubbing the bridge of her nose. She looked tired. Not the tiredness of age, but the tiredness of someone who has spent a lifetime cleaning up other people's messes. "Who was that Althea?" I asked, pouring 2 cups of black coffee. "That was the Criminal Investigation Division of the Internal Revenue Service," she said, taking the cup I offered. "Specifically, the special agent in charge of the task force investigating tax fraud in small businesses." I sat down opposite her. "The IRS," I said. "I knew there were tax issues, Althea. Lucille mentioned it in the ledgers, but I thought it was just about the money Terrence stole from the shop." Althea shook her head slowly. Her eyes were full of a deep sadness. "Clarence, you need to understand how much Lucille loved those boys. And you need to understand how that love became their poison." She pulled a stack of documents from her briefcase. These were not handwritten notes. These were official government tax forms, 941 forms, payroll tax returns, corporate income statements. "For the last 5 years, Terrence has been running the auto parts supply company into the ground," Althea explained. "He was taking a salary of $150,000 a year. Victoria was on the payroll as a consultant for another $80,000. They were leasing luxury cars through the company. They were expensing vacations. They were bleeding the business dry." I nodded. I knew that part. I saw the numbers in the ledger. "But here is the part you didn't know," Althea continued. "The business wasn't making enough profit to pay those salaries. So Terrence stopped paying the payroll taxes. He stopped paying the employer's share of Social Security and Medicare. He stopped paying the withholding tax for the employees." I felt a chill run down my spine. I was a business owner. I knew the golden rule. You can stiff a vendor, you can be late on rent, but you never ever steal from the government. That is not debt, that is a federal crime. "How much?" I asked. Althea pushed a piece of paper across the table. It was a notice of intent to levy. The number at the bottom was printed in bold black ink, $642,000. I stared at the number. It was a fortune. It was more than the shop was worth. It was enough to bury anyone. "Lucille knew," I whispered. "Yes," Althea said. "Lucille found out 3 years ago. That was when she started working those late nights. You thought she was doing extra tax returns for clients. She wasn't. She was using her own savings. She was using her retirement money. She was even taking out personal loans to pay down their tax debt bit by bit. She was trying to keep them out of jail, Clarence. She was the dam holding back the flood." I closed my eyes. I could see her, my wife, sitting in that office under the harsh light of the desk lamp, writing checks with shaking hands, trying to save the sons who were laughing at her behind her back. "But then she got sick," Althea said softly, "and the payments stopped. The IRS started sending notices. Terrence hid them. He thought if he ignored them, they would go away. Or worse, he thought his mother was still taking care of it from her hospital bed. And then the penalties kicked in, and the interest, and the fines for non-filing." Althea took a sip of coffee. "But that is not the worst part, Clarence." I looked at her. How could it get worse? $600,000 was already a death sentence for them financially. "The worst part is what Victoria did," Althea said. She pulled out another document. It was a tax return filed last year. It was dated 6 months after Lucille died. "Look at the signature," Althea said, pointing to the bottom line. I looked. It was Lucille's signature. Or at least it looked like it. It was shaky and weak, but it spelled out Lucille Henderson. "Victoria filed this return," Althea said, her voice hardening. She realized the IRS was closing in. She realized they were about to audit the company. So she filed an amended return. In this document, she claimed that all the financial mismanagement, all the missed payments, all the embezzlement, she claimed it was all the fault of the previous accountant. I looked up. The previous accountant was Lucille. Yes, Althea confirmed. Victoria tried to frame a dead woman. She tried to pin the tax fraud on your wife. She forged Lucille's signature on a confession letter attached to this return. She claimed Lucille had dementia and had forgotten to file the taxes, and that she, Victoria, and Terrence were the innocent victims of her negligence. I felt a rage so hot it almost blinded me. They didn't just kill her, they tried to kill her name. They tried to turn her legacy into a crime scene to save their own skins. That is why she wanted the house, I realized. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Exactly, Althea said. Victoria didn't just want a bigger house. She needed the equity. She needed to sell this place for $1.5 million so she could take $600,000 to pay off the IRS before they investigated the signature. She was going to use Lucille's own home to cover up the fact that she tried to frame Lucille. It was a circle of evil so perfect it was almost admiring. And now I asked. Now the dam has broken, Althea said. I just spoke to Agent Perkins. I sent him the death certificate. I sent him proof that Lucille was deceased 6 months before this document was signed. I sent him handwriting samples of Victoria. Althea leaned forward. The IRS does not care about family drama, Clarence. They care about two things: the money and the lie. Terrence is the CEO. He is responsible for the money. He will be held personally liable for the full $600,000. They will garnish his wages for the rest of his life. They will seize his car. They will seize his bank accounts. He will never own a credit card again. He is effectively a financial ghost. And Victoria, I asked. Althea smiled grimly. Forgeries on a federal tax document carries a mandatory minimum sentence. Attempting to defraud the United States government is a felony. Agent Perkins is very interested in Victoria. He calls her the mastermind. I looked at the empty chair where my son had sat 10 minutes ago. He had been crying about his job. He had been crying about his reputation. He had no idea that his life as he knew it was already over. He was walking around free, but he was already a prisoner. Does Terrence know about the forgery? I asked. Althea shrugged. It doesn't matter if he knew. He signed the return right next to her. That makes him a co-conspirator. But knowing Terrence, he probably just signed where she told him to sign. He was too lazy to read it. And that laziness is going to cost him his freedom. I stood up and walked to the window. The street was empty. The sun was shining on the wet asphalt, making it steam. They are going to prison, I said. It wasn't a question. Victoria is definitely going to prison, Althea said. Terrence might get a plea deal if he flips on her. But considering you just threw them out and they have no resources and no lawyer, that is unlikely. They will likely both serve time, and when they get out, they will be destitute. I thought about the baby that wasn't Terrence's, the baby that belonged to Brad the broker. What about the child? I asked. That child will be born in the federal system, Althea said bluntly, unless Victoria finds a relative to take it. But given that she has alienated everyone in her life, that child will likely end up in foster care. I felt a pang of sorrow, an innocent life caught in the machinery of greed. I turned back to Althea. Can we help the child? I asked. Not her. Not him. But the baby. Althea looked at me with respect. We can petition for custody, she said, since you are the grandfather by marriage. But Clarence, are you sure? That child is not your blood, and it is the child of the woman who tried to destroy you. I looked at the picture of Lucille on the fridge. She was smiling, holding a batch of cookies. She loved kids. She didn't care whose kids they were. She just loved them. Lucille wouldn't want a baby to pay for the sins of the mother, I said. When the time comes, Althea, when they lock her up, you file the papers. We will take the boy. We will raise him right. We will teach him that work is honor and lies are poison. Althea nodded, making a note on her pad. You are a better man than they deserve, Clarence. I am not a good man, I said, pouring the rest of the coffee down the sink. A good man would have seen this coming. A good man would have stopped it 10 years ago. I am just a man cleaning up his yard after a hurricane. Althea packed up her files. The click of the latches sounded like a cell door slamming shut. Agent Perkins is issuing the warrants this afternoon, she said, standing up. They will be picked up within 24 hours, likely at their hotel since they have nowhere else to go. Do you want to be notified? No, I said. I don't want to know. I don't want to see the mugshots. I just want it to be over. Althea walked to the door. She paused and looked back at me. It is over, Clarence. The debt is called in. The books are balanced. I watched her drive away. I was alone in the house. It was a big house. too big for one old man. But it wasn't empty. It was filled with the truth. And the truth took up a lot of space. I walked back to the office. The wall was still open, the safe door hanging ajar. I looked at the empty space where the ledgers had been. I took the red ledger, the black ledger, and the yellow ledger. I walked to the fireplace in the living room. I didn't need them anymore. The IRS had the copies. The police had the statements. I struck a match. I threw the books into the hearth and watched the flames curl around the pages. I watched the numbers burn. I watched the lies turn to ash. I watched the debt of my son and the greed of his wife disappear into smoke. Smoke signals, I whispered. I hoped that wherever Lucille was, she could see the smoke. I hoped she knew that I had finally done it. I had saved the family, not by keeping it together, but by burning out the rot so that something new could grow. I sat in my chair and watched the fire until it burned down to embers. Then I closed my eyes, and for the first time in 3 years I fell into a sleep without dreams. It wasn't the police who came for them. The local police have sirens that wail like frightened children, but the federal agents arrive with a silence that is far more terrifying. It was 6 in the evening. The sun was dipping below the horizon, casting long shadows across the lawn that I had spent half my life mowing. Althea and I were sitting on the porch finishing our coffee when we saw the car. It was Terrence's leased luxury sedan. It came careening down the street, driving too fast for the neighborhood. It screeched into the driveway, nearly taking out the mailbox. I didn't stand up. I didn't flinch. I just watched as my son and his wife scrambled out of the car. They looked like refugees from a disaster they had created. Victoria's hair was wild and she was still wearing the clothes from earlier. Terrence looked pale and sweaty, his eyes darting around like a trapped animal. They ran up the walkway. They didn't see the black SUVs that were turning the corner behind them. They only saw me. They only saw the man they thought was their safety net. "Open the door," Terrence screamed, pounding his fist against the railing. "Pop let us in. The cards aren't working. The hotel declined us. The bank accounts are frozen. You have to give us cash. We need to get out of town." Victoria pushed him aside. She looked at me with venomous eyes. "You called them, didn't you? You called the IRS. You vindictive old man. Fix this. Call them back and tell them it was a mistake. Tell them you gave us permission to sign those papers." I took a sip of my coffee. It was cold, but I drank it anyway. "I can't do that, Victoria," I said calmly. "Lying to federal agents is a crime, and I am done committing crimes for this family." That was when the SUVs stopped. There were 4 of them, black Tahoes with tinted windows. They blocked the driveway. They blocked the street. Doors opened in unison. Men and women in windbreakers stepped out. On the back of their jackets in bright yellow letters were 3 letters that strike fear into the hearts of billionaires and gangsters alike. FBI. And next to them, the agents from the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. Victoria stopped screaming. She turned around slowly. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Agent Perkins, the man Althea had spoken to on the phone, walked up the driveway. He didn't run. He didn't draw a weapon. He walked with the heavy, inevitable pace of Judgment Day. He held a piece of paper in his hand. "Victoria Henderson," he said, his voice flat and professional. "Terrence Henderson, I have a federal warrant for your arrest." "No." Victoria whispered, backing away until she hit the porch steps. "No, this is a misunderstanding. My lawyer will explain. You can explain it to the judge," Agent Perkins said. 2 agents moved forward. They grabbed Victoria's arms. She didn't go quietly. She started to kick and scream. It wasn't the scream of a victim. It was the scream of a narcissist who couldn't believe the world dared to touch her. "Get your hands off me," she shrieked. "Do you know who I am? I am a mother. I am pregnant. You can't arrest a pregnant woman." Agent Perkins didn't blink. "We have a medical team on standby at the detention center, ma'am. Turn around." They spun her around. The sound of the handcuffs ratcheting shut was loud and metallic. Click, click, click. It was the sound of a steel trap finally snapping shut on a wolf leg. Victoria looked at me. Her face was twisted into something unrecognizable. "I will kill you!" she screamed at me, spitting the words out. "I will burn this house down from my cell. I will make sure you die alone." I didn't look away. I didn't blink. I watched her until they shoved her into the back of the first SUV. Then they turned to Terrence. My son was standing by the porch railing. He wasn't fighting. He was shaking. He was weeping openly, tears streaming down his face, ruining his silk shirt. He looked at the agents, and then he looked at me. "Pop," he choked out. The agents grabbed him. They were gentle but firm. They pulled his arms behind his back. Terrence panicked. The reality of it finally hit him. He wasn't going to a country club. He wasn't going to a hotel. He was going to a cage. "Pop, help me," he screamed, struggling against the agents. "Don't let them take me. I am your son. I am sorry. I will sign the papers. I will testify. I will do anything. Just tell them to stop." He fell to his knees, dragging the agents down with him. He was begging. He was pleading. He was calling out to the father who had saved him from every scraped knee and every bad grade and every bounced check for 35 years. "Dad," he wailed. "Daddy, please." The word cut through me. Daddy. He hadn't called me that since he was 10 years old. It was a weapon. It was a harpoon aimed straight at my heart, designed to hook into my guilt and pull me back into the drowning water with him. I stood up. I walked to the edge of the porch. I looked down at him. I saw the fear in his eyes, but I also saw the weakness. I saw the man who had watched his mother die and done nothing because it was inconvenient to speak up. "I am not your father," I said, my voice soft but carrying over the commotion. Terrence froze. "Your father was a man who believed in family," I said. "Your father was a man who believed in honor. That man died when you poisoned his wife. I am just the witness." I turned around. "No," Terrence screamed. "Pop, don't turn your back on me. Look at me." "Dad." I walked to the front door. I didn't rush. I moved with the slow, deliberate movements of a man who has finished a hard day's work. Behind me, I heard the car door slam shut. I heard the engine rever. I heard the muffled sobbing of a man who had realized too late that love is not an infinite resource. I stepped inside the house and closed the door. The silence that followed was heavy. It wasn't the empty silence of before. It was a thick, ringing silence, the kind that happens after a gunshot. Althea was standing in the hallway. She had watched it all from the window. She didn't say anything. She just reached out and took my hand. We stood there for a long time. I could hear the sound of the SUVs driving away. I could hear the neighbors coming out onto their lawns, whispering, wondering, asking what had happened at the Henderson house. Let them talk. Let them wonder. They didn't know about the safe. They didn't know about the pills. They didn't know that tonight, for the first time in years, Lucille was finally resting in peace. I looked at my hand. It was trembling slightly. I clenched it into a fist until the shaking stopped. "Are you okay?" Althea asked softly. I looked at the empty living room. I looked at the spot where the Christmas tree used to go. I looked at the stairs where my boys used to run up and down laughing. "I am alive," I said, "and that is enough." I walked to the kitchen and locked the back door. Then I checked the windows. I turned off the porch light. The house was dark now, but it wasn't scary. It felt secure. It felt like a fortress that had withstood a siege. I went into the office. The hole in the wall was still there. The safe was empty. I sat down in Lucille's chair. I spun it around to face the window. The moon was rising over the magnolia trees. It was a full moon, bright and cold. "Goodbye, Terrence," I whispered into the darkness. "Goodbye, Darnell. Goodbye, Victoria." I didn't say it with anger. I said it with relief. I closed my eyes and listened to the house settling. The creaks and groans of the old wood were familiar to me. They were the sounds of survival. Tomorrow I would call the contractor. We would patch the wall. We would paint the room. We would turn this office into the library Lucille had always wanted. We would fill it with books and light. And maybe, just maybe, I would get a dog. A rescue dog. One that had been mistreated and abandoned. One that knew the value of a second chance. But for tonight I just sat in the dark and breathed. In and out, in and out. I was alone. But I was free. It has been 6 months since the flashing lights of the federal agents faded from my driveway. 6 months is a long time in the life of an old mechanic. It is enough time for the seasons to change from the humid oppression of summer to the crisp golden light of autumn. It is enough time for the grass to grow back where the police cars tore it up. And it is enough time for a house to heal. If you walked past my house today, you would not recognize it as the fortress of solitude it used to be. The heavy velvet curtains that Victoria hated so much are gone, but they were not replaced by modern blinds. They were replaced by sheer linen that lets the sunlight pour in. The driveway is no longer filled with leased luxury cars that I paid for. Instead, it is often filled with the beat-up sedans and minivans of the volunteers who come here every day. We did it. Althea and I. We turned the house into the Lucille Henderson Haven. It is not a shelter in the traditional sense. It is a transition home for women who are escaping financial abuse. Women who, like me, woke up one day to find that the people they trusted had stolen their futures. The office where Lucille spent her final agonizing days is no longer a place of secrets. We tore down the false wall. We removed the empty safe. Mr. Russo came back with his crew and they worked for free for 3 weeks. They installed floor-to-ceiling bookshelves made of warm cherry wood. They put in comfortable armchairs and reading lamps. It is now a library where women can learn about financial literacy. They sit in the very spot where I opened the ledgers and they learn how to balance a checkbook. They learn how to spot fraud. They learn how to protect themselves so they never have to be victims. I walk through the house now and I don't hear the echoes of Terrence and Victoria arguing about money. I hear laughter. I hear the sound of children playing in the backyard where I built a new swing set. There is a young woman named Sarah staying in the guest room. She has a 2-year-old daughter. Yesterday I watched that little girl chase a butterfly across the lawn, and for the first time in years the knot in my chest loosened completely. I am not just the landlord here. I am the grandfather they need. I fix their cars when they break down. I teach them how to change a tire. I sit on the porch and tell them stories about Lucille. I tell them she was a warrior who fought with a pen instead of a sword. Her name is on the plaque by the front door, and every time I polish it, I feel her smiling down on me. But peace is not just about what you build. It is also about what you destroy. This morning, the mailman arrived with a stack of envelopes. Most of them were donations or letters from the city council praising the new center. But at the bottom of the stack was a plain white envelope. It looked harmless, but the return address in the corner was stamped with red ink. Georgia State Penitentiary. It was from Terrence. I took the letter and walked into the living room. I sat in my armchair, the one Victoria wanted to throw away. I held the envelope in my grease-stained hands. It felt light. It felt insignificant. I knew what was inside. I didn't need to open it to know the words he had written. I knew the script by heart because I had heard it for 35 years. He would start with an apology. He would say he has found God in prison. He would say he misses me. And then in the second paragraph, he would ask for money. He would ask for commissary funds. He would ask me to call Althea to work on his appeal. He would ask and ask and ask because that is what parasites do. They feed until the host is dry. My thumb hovered over the flap of the envelope. Part of me, the old part, the father part, wanted to open it, wanted to see his handwriting, wanted to believe that maybe prison had changed him, wanted to believe that somewhere deep inside that cell was the little boy who used to catch fireflies with me. But then I looked at the fireplace. I looked at the spot where I had burned the ledgers. I realized that opening that letter was not an act of love. It was an act of self-harm. It would be inviting the poison back into my veins. I stood up and walked to the hearth. The fire was not lit, but I kept a box of matches on the mantel. I struck a match. The flame flared to life, blue and orange and clean. I held the corner of the envelope to the flame. I watched the paper curl and blacken. I watched the red stamp of the penitentiary turn to ash. I watched my son's name disappear into smoke. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel sad. I felt light. I dropped the burning paper into the grate and watched it crumble until it was nothing but gray dust. I am not cruel. I am just finished. I have forgiven him in my heart because holding on to hate is drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. But forgiveness does not mean access. You can forgive a snake for biting you, but you do not invite it back into your bed. I walked out onto the porch and sat in the rocking chair. A dog trotted up to me and rested his heavy head on my knee. His name is Buster. I adopted him from the pound last month. He is an old pit bull with scars on his face and a limp in his back leg. Someone beat him. Someone used him and threw him away when he was no longer useful. We are a matching set, Buster and I. I scratched him behind the ears and he sighed with contentment, closing his eyes. He doesn't want my money. He doesn't want my house. He just wants to be near me. He just wants to be safe. That I realized is the true definition of family. Family is not about whose blood runs in your veins. It is not about a last name or a birth certificate. It is not about obligation or guilt. Family are the people who respect you when you are weak and protect you when you are strong. Family are the people who bring you peace, not chaos. Family are the ones who sit on the porch with you and watch the sunset without wanting to own the sun. I learned this lesson late in life. It cost me my biological sons. It cost me my heart. But I paid the price and I bought my freedom. I am Clarence Henderson. I am 68 years old. I live in a house full of strangers who treat me better than my own kin ever did. I have a 3-legged dog and a clear conscience. Lucille was right. She left me the map in that safe. It was a hard road to walk. It was a road paved with betrayal and tears. But it led me here. It led me to the truth, and the truth is I am not alone. I have never been less alone in my life. To everyone listening to my story, I want you to look at the people around you. Look at who is sitting at your table. Do they bring you joy or do they bring you bills? Do they ask how you are or do they ask what you can do for them? Don't be afraid to close the door. Don't be afraid to change the locks. Don't be afraid to burn the letter. Your life belongs to you. Your peace belongs to you. Defend it, fight for it, and never ever let anyone tell you that you owe them your happiness just because you share a last name. I am going to go inside now. Sarah is making apple pie and she promised to save me a slice. Buster is hungry and the sun is setting on a beautiful day. My name is Clarence, and for the first time in a long time, I am home. Thank you for listening. If my story touched you, please share it. You never know who needs to hear that it is okay to walk away. Leave a comment below and tell me what peace looks like to you. I will be reading them from my porch. Until next time, take care of yourselves and remember to check the walls of your own life. You might find a treasure, or you might find the truth. Goodbye. The hardest lesson I learned was not about money or law, but about the definition of loyalty. For years, I confused enabling with loving. I thought that if I just gave enough, gave until I was empty, my sons would finally respect me. But you cannot buy love, and you cannot negotiate with greed. Lucille taught me from the grave that true family is not about whose blood runs in your veins. It is about who stands by you in the storm. Do not set yourself on fire to keep others warm, especially if they are the ones holding the matches. Your dignity is the one asset you must never liquidate. If my story gave you the courage to examine your own life, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories of truth and justice. And tell me in the comments below, have you ever had to cut ties with a family member to save your own soul? I will be reading your stories from my porch. Stay strong and see you in the next video.